This was something that happened to me quite some time ago, and believe me, I have learned my lesson. As many people do, I love having nice, sometimes high-end things, be it clothing, accessories, or even just some home decor. However, I do not like paying full price for such items. I tend to love them even more when I can brag that I got it for half the price or close to it. This is why I love going to community yard sales in those posh, gated communities. They're always getting rid of that kind of stuff because it doesn't fit the theme of their living room or it's no longer in style. And at least the ones I go to, they'd rather just see the stuff gone than try to get some of their money back. This is how I end up with a lot of the stuff I have. I have a very nice lamp set, and even a matching bed frame and dresser because of it. Those are just my favorite items. Anyway, this is how I got myself into a bit of temporary trouble. Now, in a lot of these gated communities, you may get some kind of pass to be there, and some homeowners may even have their own sign-in sheets. It was typically pretty simple. They just require you to put your name and a phone number. And I never had troubles before putting my first name, last initial, and phone number. I'm sure it was just to keep track of the outsiders in case anything went awry. But it was a small price to pay to get to those items that I wanted. I drove around the homes, looking for the best things, when I spotted a nice house with tons of stuff across their half-circle driveway and their yard, in a path so as to not damage their lawn, of course. So I stopped, signed in with their little sheet, and made my way to the tables. As I approached it, I saw a couple standing near the garage under their little umbrella that they had set up. He had said something to the woman, who was now smiling, and then she threw her head back to laugh and caressed his arm. She looked over at me and smiled, so I nodded and smiled back before looking back down at the table. I ended up making my way to a few tables of clothing, and, to no surprise, I found a lot of stuff that was in great condition, as well as high-end brands. Even better, a lot of it was my size. I started digging through the clothes when the man that I saw earlier, most likely the homeowner, approached, greeting me. He started with just some niceties, told me his name, holding out his hand, so I accepted and gave mine too. I mean, I had signed his book, so no point in lying anyways. The conversation then turned to the jeans I was holding, and after looking at them, he said his wife's clothing would likely fit me, saying we looked close in size. I actually did tell him that they would, and in fact, some would be a little too big, but they were still worth considering. This is where the conversation started to fall apart. He stepped back a little, eyeing me up and down, and said that I was definitely similar in size, but that I had bigger assets. I was taken aback by his comment, and all I could think to do was laugh and refuse to make eye contact. I held the pair of pants that I was holding close to my chest, waiting for him to stop gawking at me. But unfortunately, it didn't end there. He then stepped closer to me and said that his wife was also selling some other intimates, and then asked me for my bra size. I again laughed nervously, but told him that I wasn't interested. I tried to ignore him, but I could see from the corner of my eye that he turned around to look towards his house, and then turned back to me. He leaned on the table and said, "Look, my wife is really into you," and then invited me back to their house later that night. Absolutely horrified at this point, I dropped the pants, said that I wasn't interested, and made a beeline for my car, feeling his eyes on me the entire time. I felt gross and creeped out. Who hits on another person right in front of their spouse? But here's where it got worse. I started getting texts from an unknown number. They were calling me pet names, saying some fairly raunchy things, and that even led to pictures. You can guess what kind of pictures. It didn't take long for me to figure out who it was. I did fill out the sign-in sheet with my first name and phone number. Before the picture started, I tried to just ignore him, thinking that if I didn't respond, he would eventually get bored. But once I started getting the pictures, I had to put a stop to it. If he was willing to do this, who knew how far he would be willing to take it? Not to mention he had a wife. She deserved to know what he was up to. The next day, I drove to the area and was able to get in with little trouble. It was a Monday, so the community sales were over, but I told them that I was there to pick up a larger item that I had bought the previous day and that they could even confirm for my previous check-in. So I got through and slowly drove down the street, looking for the right house. It didn't take me long to spot it. Thankfully, they had a unique yard ornament that stuck out to me. There was a small silver car in the driveway, and based on the size, and the few personal items I saw inside it, I assumed it belonged to a woman, and hoped that that meant she was home and home alone. I rang the doorbell, and thankfully the same woman from the yard sale answered. I told her that I wanted to speak to her about a sale that she had the other day, and she even said that she remembered seeing me there. I had a slight chill, worried that if what he said was true and she was in on this too. But just in case, I stayed in the doorway, refusing to go in when she offered. I pulled out my phone and started to explain her husband's behavior during the sale. I then went into the texts and lewd photos that I had been receiving and even showed them to her, pointing out the phone number specifically and asking her if she recognized it. The whole time she had such a bewildered look on her face, and if anything, it made me feel like she had no idea this was happening. I felt bad to lay this all on her, but also felt good about calling him out. But then her response had me sharing the confusion. She told me that her husband was long gone, and that the phone number that was texting me and the man at that sale was actually her son. Oh, and not to mention, he also was not married. She did, however, apologize for his behavior and said that she would handle the situation, telling me that the house was hers and he was not only living there, but she paid his phone bill. She then went on to tell me a few other, probably embarrassing things about him, before hugging me and sending me off with the homemade cinnamon roll. It was probably the best one that I've ever had. True to her word, the texts and pictures stopped that day. I can only imagine the conversation that must have taken place between the two of them. If you asked me if I expected the situation to play out like that, I would tell you never in a million years. But now, I have the best example of speaking up about a disturbing and creepy situation. Maybe he would have given up, and maybe it wouldn't have moved past text or calls. But there was that chance that it could have escalated. So I'm thankful that I took action, and so did his mother. And nowadays, those gated communities that have sign-ins at the entrance with security, if they ask for my contact info, I give a fake number. I'll do whatever it takes to not put myself in that situation again. So, to give you a little bit of background information on this story, which is 100% true, I would like to start with the fact that I am European. I posted another story a couple of months back about something that happened to me in Tuscany, Italy. As for me and my friends in this story, we are from Spain. And when this happened, the end of September 2023, we were fairly new to the USA. I moved here a while back for law school, and so did my friends. We'd been living here for a few months and decided to explore the nature of this beautiful continent, as we all live in NYC. So, long story short, we decided to go on a road trip to Canada, drive around Lake Ontario, and then drive back to NYC through upstate New York. I'm a male and my friends were 3 females. For the sake of anonymity, let's call them Lisa, Anna, and Charlotte. Everything went super smooth until the last night. So, for our last night, We had rented an off-grid cabin in a remote area in the woods in upstate New York. To give some locals an idea, we were like half an hour drive from Harrisburg, I think. Me and Lisa had decided to spend one night in this cabin because it was one with nature. The cabin was super old, made from log wood, and there was no running water or electricity. Both me and Lisa had experience with survival in the wild in Europe. I, for myself, had been a Boy Scout my whole life, and even was a scout leader for a while. Our other two friends were, as much as I loved them, purebred city girls. They had pretty much zero experience with camping, or to just be in a place where there is no service for the phones, as was the case in this cabin. We had been driving all day to get there, and when we reached the beginning of the forest, it was already past 10 p.m., and it was really dark that night. While driving to this place, we lost internet connection with the GPS, and so I had to drive to the cabin on intuition, paired with a good old-fashioned map, hoping for the best while trying to drive safe on these muddy trails. It was also rainy the whole day. On the way there, Anna and Charlotte were in the back of the car, and the moment they lost phone service, they got pretty uneasy for the rest of the ride. All of a sudden, in the pitch-black darkness of the forest, we all saw a campfire. But there were no houses around, nor people. Just a campfire. A well-organized one, since the fire was not spreading, and it was not as big as a bonfire. It kind of startled all of us, as this was a little bit weird since there was no one around, and we were really deep in the forest already. Plus, it was getting very late. When this happened, we also reached the end of the trail, and we figured we had taken the wrong trail at the crossroads before. So I turned around, and we were on our way again. Half an hour later, and a couple of wrong trails later, we finally had arrived at our destination, as we could finally see the first glimpse of this god-forsaken cabin in the middle of nowhere. To give you an idea of how old it was, the bathroom was made out of wood and was outside the cabin. When we arrived, it was still raining, and both Anna and Lisa were definitely not in the mood for getting out of the car and to get into the cabin with zero lights. So, me and Lisa left the lights of the car on and went inside the cabin, while also using our phone flashlights to check the cabin out and see if we could find any old flashlights, which we did, and to see if we could turn on the fireplace, which we didn't, because all the wood was still wet from the rain and it seemed as if no one had prepared dry wood anywhere. So, with a couple of old flashlights and a small improvised fire I managed to make in the stove, we all four got in the cabin and I started to make some pasta for us. Meanwhile, the girls were preparing the beds and closing the windows since it was already cold in this part of the state. The cabin had a small ladder which led to an elevated room/space, with a bed where all three of the girls could fit in, and I would sleep downstairs, in a bunk bed that seemed older than the First World War. While making pasta, Anna, one of the city girls, came up to me and, knowing that both Lisa and Charlotte did not like to hear anything scary at night, told me that she had seen an old cemetery in the middle of the forest on the way to our cabin, and that she had seen a figure walking around there. I first laughed it off as nothing. As I mentioned in my previous story, I do not consider myself a big believer of scary stuff. Being from Spain, we take promises very serious. To swear on God is very serious for us, and she swore to God that she was not lying. I told her then that I believed her, but that there was no need to panic, as I would lock all the doors when we would go to sleep. We had some pasta, managed to make a couple of s'mores, which are lovely by the way, and drank a couple of beers, or at least I did. They all had just one. I can assure you that I am not drunk after a couple of beers, and that I would never start to hallucinate. Just saying in case anyone thinks that I saw stuff because of the beer. They all three went to sleep pretty early after finishing the s'mores and their beer, and I considered that I really love the outdoors and that I don't really mind a little bit of rain. Then I decided to take my last beer and flashlight outside to the front porch, which was also very old and made of wood, and I sat myself down with my beer while enjoying the sound of rain and the lovely sight of not seeing a single light in the distance. I could greatly appreciate this, coming from NYC, and I just scanned the area around with my flashlight. There was nothing much really to see, besides a lot of trees and a small creek a little further away. All I could hear was the wind, the rain, and the running water down in the creek. That was until I suddenly heard what I would describe as a weird roar. The first thing that came to mind was a bear. But I had researched well before our trip, and I knew bears were not common at all in this part of the state. I also know what a bear roar would sound like, and it did not resemble a lot, except for the fact that it was a really deep roar, if you get what I mean. Startled but not really scared, I continued to scan the rest of the forest for as far as I could see from the porch. It was then when my eye caught the glimpse of a figure, well hidden deep into the tree line. I would describe the figure as tall. As a reference, I'm 6'4", and I thought this thing was at least a foot or two higher than me. It was well hidden because with its brown fur, that's what I think it was at the least, or the skin, in any case, blended in well with the trees in autumn. It was definitely aware of our presence, as I saw two eyes glimpsing into my flashlight. I could not tell you what it was, but I swear to God that it was not a bear. It was bipedal, and had rather long arms, I would say. We looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality it was more like 5 seconds before it vanished behind a tree, and I heard another roar. It was then when I felt all of my hair stand up, and I was definitely very much scared. I went inside as quick as I could, and locked all the doors and closed all the curtains. I quickly went to bed and tried to wave it off as just my exhaustion of driving all day, playing tricks on my mind. But I promise you that this was very real. After an hour or so, I had calmed down and finally fell asleep. The rest of the night was uneventful, and the next morning when I went to relieve myself after having drank the beer the night before, the weather had cleared and it was rather sunny. And as far as I could see, the forest was calm and beautiful. No sight of any animals or anything abnormal. We had a nice breakfast that morning, and left for our way back to the city that never sleeps. And so ends also my story of that night. I never talked about what I saw that night because I know that all 3 girls did not like to hear scary stories. And I figured, after these months, that this was the best place to share it. If anyone has an idea of what it could have been, feel free to enlighten me, especially if it's backed up with rational reasoning. Hi guys. So before I start this post, I will say that I was very young, but my mother recalls the experience quite clearly. I'm not really into cryptozoology at all, but I'm curious if this is a common sighting, or what exactly my mother, father, and I experienced. This was along Route 66, going from Texas into New Mexico. We were heading to my great-grandfather's funeral back in 2005, in the middle of the summer, and I was 10 at the time. The sun was starting to set, and I remember us talking. I'm eating a Happy Meal they bought me at the time, and we're just swapping stories and having a good time. They made this little cubby-like area in the trunk for me to lay down in, color, etc. But most of the trip was spent just looking out the window, watching things pass by. While my parents were talking and the radio was on, I was just watching the world pass. But I remember very clearly seeing a man standing and staring at cars. He wore a black trench coat, bowler, or perhaps a top hat, had a black beard, but the part that I remember the most vividly was bright, glowing red eyes. I pointed it out to my mom, who was distracted at the time, having not seen it. Well, a couple of hours go by and I'm still looking out my window. I made a little game for myself to see if I could count how many birds I could spot along the way, and the sun was starting to set. Next thing I know, I see the same dude just ahead of us. But because of the dark, the eyes were a lot more intense. My mom got a little concerned about it and told my dad to speed up. Eventually, fatigue set in and we found a rest stop. It was pitch black there. Like the kind of dark you can't even see your own feet in without light. And we were all trying to sleep. I had to go to the bathroom, and my dad walked out with me as I was rather freaked out from the sightings earlier, worried the guy would come to grab me. As we got out of the car, I remember my father staring off into the distance, and he told me to hurry up, though keeping his usual calm demeanor. When I finished and got back into the car, he started it, and we took off again, driving to stay at a motel instead. I asked him and my mother about it recently as we were reminiscing together about the trips we've taken. When I asked my dad why he had us go to a motel, he claimed it was because he saw the same pair of eyes staring at us from a hill near where we were, above a rocky outcrop. Does anyone have any ideas or stories as to what exactly this could have been? I remember the eyes so vividly. It's burned into my mind, as well as him being out in the desert heat with a heavy trench coat, and I'm just not sure. My dad swears it was the devil. My mom thinks it was a chupacabra of some sort. I myself am not sure. Any thoughts would be appreciated. As I said, this was over 19 years ago, and I haven't seen anything since, as I live far away from Route 66 now. I just listened to one of your stories about a man and his daughter freaking out about a telepathic experience. As for me, I've always found telepathy normal. My mother and sister and father have often been on long car drives, unwinding and relaxing, just flexing our minds. Nothing that we were previously discussing at all would suddenly come up in a comment or sometimes a question about something. And fast forward to when I was in my 20s, I worked for a general dentist who did a wide variety of procedures, as he also taught at the University of Louisville Dental School. My job description was to anticipate what the dentist would need, and we did this by knowing the procedures we were about to do, and the included normal steps, but also anticipate different scenarios. If I saw things were going a certain way, I could simply use my educated logic to determine alternate methods we might use. I pretty quickly realized that the closer that your head is to another person's head, that you could read their mind. It may sound strange, but now technology by the name of near field refers to messaging another person's phone with yours. The human brain is way faster than any computer. Well, I can tell you that, often, I would know something that the dentist was thinking unrelated to any dental procedure. I concluded that it's because your mind is really free when you are doing something you know well how to do, and are physically doing it. It's the same when you're around people in your family, or that you trust. It just flows. I was coming home late one night and had no intention of stopping, but I felt my mom think, get me 5 White Castles. I got this message 3 times, so I did. I got into the door to find a little sack of 5 right on top of our stove. I'd gotten it a little wrong, I guess. In later years, as bizarre as this sounds, I found it wasn't just when people's heads were near to one another. It could be way across the expanse of ground, but I could pick up someone's creepy vibe when I worked campus security, and now I can feel something or someone before I can even see them. A couple of nights ago, my little mixed terrier barked ferociously as I walked across the street, several feet, to my mailbox. And I too seemed to have a very strong aversion to moving forward. I have good night vision. I finally just stopped mid-step. Suddenly, I saw that I was right on top of a young man in all black with his hoodie up over his head and face pointed downward. Basically, he was invisible because of his black garb and low level of light. And my dog likely smelled him, but I felt his presence. My grandmother would routinely know when her half-brother's daughter would be calling. We were in Kentucky, and Helen, her niece, was in Hawaii. And she'd say, "Helen's gonna call me tonight, so pick up the phone and say hi, Helen." Did she say she was calling? I would ask ignorantly. No, I felt her think it. It would ring in a couple of hours. "Hello, Helen. Who's this?" "Carla. How did you know I was going to call?" "Grandma said that you would, a couple of hours ago." Or, my dad, near the end of his life, was bedbound and could not see outside. I came home from work and he said, "You have a new car. It's red, like the Camaro, but it's not your Camaro." No one had seen it yet. I had actually gotten it on my way home the night before and left before his caregiver arrived hours later. I said, "Yeah, it's an Ultima Coupe, red." But he was able to see it. He also warned me not to go to a little tool shed shaped like a barn, because it was dangerous and buzzing with hornets, he said. Looking in the window, I saw nothing, but it was later discovered that an empty new trash can held a humongous hive of some mud dauber bees. He couldn't go or see outside, nor could you see it while looking in, but they were there. I feel that is what's called remote viewing in those two instances, and the White Castles were telepathy, as well as my grandmother and her niece. To me, that's the way we always used to communicate in our family before cell phones. Anyone else experience that as a normal way you and your mom or siblings routinely communicated? Or was it just me? Anyway, it's not creepy to me, but rather comforting. Once upon a time, I rolled my eyes at UFO stories, saying that it would take aliens thousands of years to get here and they couldn't survive in our atmosphere. Well, I was in for one hell of a reality check. I don't like to tell this story to people in real life. I've tried many times before, but it always had undesirable results. Even if people say they believe it, it's not very satisfying because they don't actually know, so it feels like a waste of time. If I tell the story anonymously, maybe it can give someone else some added peace of mind that there are other people who know about these things. At least in my case, I wasn't the only one who witnessed these things. It started around August 17th of 1996. There were two elderly gentlemen on the local CTV news who said that they'd seen a solid bright ball of light in the sky that was too fast to be a jet and too slow to be a meteor, and it didn't move like either of those things. The news dismissed it as a likely meteor since there were meteor showers and many bright meteors during that time. Don't let that fact mislead you to the wrong conclusions, though, because there was a lot more going on than just some bright lights streaking across the sky. A little while later, my sister said that she had seen a huge glowing thing that looked like a flying fire over the field to the west. She tried to get her cousin, Dawn, to come look at what she'd seen, but she was afraid and ducked away into my grandmother's house. Learning of this coincidence alerted me for two reasons. I didn't tell her what I had seen on the news while she was outside, and while she said it looked like fire, it sounded like something my grandpa said he had seen back in 1975, and some people thought he was crazy after that. On August 19th of 1996, me and my cousin Dennis went out for a late-night walk. I didn't mention anything about the coincidental sighting my sister mentioned, but it was a bit in the back of my mind, so I was keeping an eye on stars and the horizon. It occurred to me that it was a bit silly because the chances of me actually seeing something as well was slim to none. As we came around the trees along the curving road back into the farmyard, I noticed a bright white orb with a slight blue tint around it. It was about a quarter of the size of the moon, and it didn't move at first. I was stunned, trying to identify what it might actually be. It started smoothly moving away towards a nearby town, and as it did this, I suddenly knew that I was not looking at something normal. Not normal at all. I pointed and shouted multiple times, "Look at that! Look at that!" My cousin was looking into the dark trees, acting spooked. I don't know if he thought that I was just fooling around or what he thought, so I yelled, "No, that way! Up there! What is that? Oh, crap, it's gone." It didn't flicker. It was a solid, stable color, and it changed directions quite suddenly as it passed over the nearby town of Waldeck. And so I thought that that would be the peak of any excitement that I would see that summer. But I was wrong. Well, wrong again. On August 20th, I went out looking to see if there was anything in the sky. During the day, nothing. During the night, nothing but a couple meteors and a few common satellites. On August 21st of 1996, around 11:30 p.m., my brother, my cousin Dennis, and his other friend decided to take a trip up to an old party site. It was an interesting place with a couple of abandoned, spooky old houses, and lots of weird trees and fireflies and such. I was hanging out with my cousin Brian and suggested that we go for a walk to where the others were and prank them for fun. My other motive, though, was that I wanted someone with me in case we did see something again. The chances of us actually seeing something yet again seemed incredibly slim. During the walk, I did mention it to him and mentioned how ironic and impossible it would be that we'd just happened to see one after talking about it. Well, as I was fixated on the eastern horizon where I saw the first one with the white-blue glow, my cousin started tugging hard on my jacket. I swung my head towards him as he said in an uneasy voice, "What in the hell is that?" And in the corner of my eye, I saw what looked like a fire. But as I turned my head to face it, I realized I was looking at something the size of a football stadium, with which was bright yellow in the middle and surrounded by an orange plasma, with red on the outer edge of it. It looked like the orange haze was sticking to it magnetically, and it moved with it as it gracefully slowly moved across the ground, staying at exactly the same height from the ground, even as it moved over the small hills. It looked like a completely stereotypical UFO. It was oval-shaped from the side, a bit like a football, and was totally silent. After a bit, it moved into an angled position, maybe about 45 degrees to the ground. It couldn't have been more than 50 feet from the ground. I said, "Let's get closer to it." He said, "What if they have guns or something?" To which I said, "I don't think they would fly thousands of light years to waste their time shooting at us." I'm not sure if that's exactly what I said, but it was something like that. Anyhow, I convinced him that we should run closer to it, and maybe we could even get a close encounter. So we dashed through the wheat field. However, as we were running, he reminded me that he has asthma. So I slowed down and began to flash the blue light on my watch at it. My cousin said, "Did you see that?" Apparently it shined a blue-green light back at us. But I didn't notice it because I was busy trying to take it off so I could hold it in my hand. As we tried to get closer, it just kept moving away from us, preventing us from actually getting any closer. It finally took off. It was so quick that I barely realized what had happened until it was gone. There was no sonic boom or anything, which, I reasoned, this really doesn't seem like something humankind could ever make. If it was human-made, well, that's still pretty crazy. And trying to explain away one craft still doesn't explain the other different-looking ones that we had seen before that. But truly, I don't honestly believe it's possible that it was humans who made those things. Hi, Raven. I recently discovered your podcast and have been enjoying listening to all the stories. I've always believed in the paranormal, but after my mom passed away 10 years ago, I felt frustrated that I never saw her in a ghostly presence. Instead of visiting me this way, I'd often have encounters with her moving things for me, specifically things that I thought I had misplaced. It wasn't until 2 years ago when I had my most vivid dream of her, and I later realized that she came to me to warn me of a betrayal. My mom and I had a great relationship, and I was devastated when she passed away when I was only 21 years old. My dad had not handled her illness and passing well, and he was cheating on her while she was sick, and continued to make poor decisions as soon as she was gone. This resulted in me having a very strained relationship with him. At this point, my mom had been passed for 8 years, and at the time, my relationship with my dad was great. He had remarried a few years ago and had 2 stepdaughters that just finished high school. I remember thinking that my dad was being so nice to me at the time and that he wanted to spend a lot of time with me, and even gave me my mom's jewelry after I had asked for years. Everything was peachy, right? So I was extremely disturbed when I had a dream on a Tuesday night that left me waking up in tears. In my dream, my mom was angry with me. Like, very angry with me. But she wasn't saying anything. I could tell by just looking at her. She then began stabbing me in the back repeatedly while staying silent. I was so upset when I woke up. Had I upset her? Was she mad at me? A week later, exactly, my dad FaceTimed me, despite living 5 minutes from me, to tell me he was expecting a baby with his new wife. My dad is 63 years old, had just had his first grandchild. I was extremely distraught, angry, and disturbed. That's when I connected the dots with the dream, and I reached out to my friend who was well versed in assessing dreams. She directed me to a book and told me that Wednesday is a common day for the dead to visit us, and that my dream was probably into the early hours of Wednesday. I 100% believe that my mom was warning me of this serious betrayal. There's more to the story of my dad's lies, but he just wasn't a good dad in many ways. The anger, the backstabbing, the silence, it was all a warning of the big bomb that he would soon drop on me. And thanks for listening. Hi everyone. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, home of the Kentucky Derby. About a 45-minute drive is a very old, quaint town called Bardstown. In the early days, the sheriff was the first cousin of Jesse James. Because of this, the gunslinger would get into trouble and make it to Bardstown to hide in the cave system. There also was an inn called the Talbot. It's still there, and they call it the Talbot's Tavern. It's on a national register of being one of the most haunted places in America, as is Waverly Hills in Louisville. When you go to Talbot Tavern, you see a bar as well as a dining table, and former slave quarters with dining and bar. And then upstairs are rentable rooms. One has on it Jesse James's room. My sister had kept up with her first-grade teacher that she loved dearly. She was a Catholic Sister of Charity of the Nazareth. Their convent territory is right in Bardstown and housed a large university. Since she wanted to pay her a visit and go to lunch, we picked the Talbot. After eating, we ascended the steps and looked around, and I said I wanted to take their photo in front of that door. Only 3 others were up there looking around at the other end from us. I've taken photos with my dad for years. I know when someone blinks a lot and will know if something passes my camera the second I shoot. I grew up with 35mm film, and I got good at catching these problems, so my pictures weren't ruined as you paid by the frame. But this was a new digital camera. Still, as someone, a man, walking around walked in front of my lens and my picture was ruined, I told them and they both said, "No, no one walked between us and you." I then said, "Well, anyway, let's redo that." So I got home and on my desktop computer was the black figure of a man, and the edge of his lower body looked like someone had chopped his image off with pinking shears, like a fakey ghost costume. I will tell you some more Bardstown stories soon. I want to say that digital captures ghosts and orbs best for some reason, and I believe it's because it picks up on electricity or energy. I was photographing something on my roof in the winter, and it was of the main electric line going to my house. I used a digital camera in the cold weather. All around that bundle of wires was an aura of electricity. That's why I think it captures them so well. Also, if you snap a stun gun any season, it cracks, flashes a bit, but in the cold weather, that electricity goes way further, out like a ball of fire. Souls are electricity minus the matter of the body, and electricity is fascinating. It's invisible mostly, but not always. It can cook, light, protect, or kill. It always was, is now, and always will be. It can shock a person's heart back to life or fry them on a live wire. It lights our way, and enervates almost anything we can harness it for. Yet, it can overpower us quickly. And it has definite laws of all of its actions. So, me and my family bought our house back in 2000. We were the first to live there and moved in after the house was built. The only explanations we have is that the clothing these ghosts seem to wear are like early 1900s, late 1800s, and you'll know why. The first ghost made herself known when I was 12 to 14. I always had trouble sleeping at night and couldn't walk around my house at night, as I felt like someone was always watching. But I always just thought that that was a rational kid thinking, or so I thought. One night, I was lying on my bed, not to sleep, but on top of my comforter and all. I was just staring out my bedroom door into the hallway. The hallway light and the bedroom light was on, and being on the second floor, I think I also had on the main entrance light. Think of a chandelier, where the entrance is where you can see the stairs right away, and you can see a bit upstairs as well. I had no music or anything playing when I hear a little girl's laugh just as the lights turn off and my door closes shut. I freaked out and started screaming when my mom came out of her room on the first floor, thinking I was playing with the lights. She didn't believe my explanation that night, but I'll come back to this. The second ghost made himself known in a more creepier way. One night when I was 15 to 16, I woke up at exactly 3:14. I felt something tap on my shoulder, and as I turned to see what it was, a man stood next to my bed. He appeared to be in his late 40s, early 50s, judging from his white hair and white mustache and beard, in what I could only describe as a Civil War uniform from the Confederacy. The only thing was his skin was very pale, and his eyes had no pupils. I wanted to scream, but he only moved his finger over his lips to signify being quiet. I laid in my bed frozen with fear as he walked out of my room and closed the door quietly. From that night, I kept hearing him march in my upstairs hallway. Now, being that I was the only one that could account these spirits, I was always told that I was crazy. Until my brother and mom told me they noticed the girl. She never did anything harmful, except she loves to play with us by hiding things somewhere where we know we didn't leave them, as well as returning them to where they were originally after we look everywhere. The main things are keys, remotes, and small objects like nail polish or makeup. It's gotten to the point where if we lose something, and we know it's not where we left it, we just say, "Little girl, we need this back," or "Little girl, we're in a rush and can't play." She'll normally put it back in its place a bit quicker. The older man was seen by my grandfather, and my mom as well. My grandfather just saw him walk in the front door and directly to my parents' room. My mom would see him at night, but all he does is tip his hat to her and walk away. One night, where she was crying a lot, I believe it was over losing her grandparents or her brother, he sat next to her and put his hand on her shoulder. She said that he felt very cold, but that she felt safe. I'm not sure if this means anything, but I thought it would be cool to share this with you all. My wife and I were talking about having another yard sale this year, which brought up the last experience we had when we hosted one 2 years ago. I started listening to your channel last year, so I hadn't even considered submitting this, but I think I should share what happened to us with you now. We were going to be moving to a smaller house on the other side of the city, so we wanted to try and condense and get rid of a lot of stuff beforehand. I certainly didn't want to waste energy on moving things that we no longer wanted. Not to mention, we can make a little extra cash to help pay for the moving truck or something else. The neighborhood we lived in had always been pretty quiet. Sometimes the couple a few houses down would argue in the front yard, but that was about as wild as it got. People around were typically friendly, and they would wave at you if you were out in your yard. There were tons of kids that would ride their bikes or scooters down the sidewalk, and there was even an elementary school just around the block from us. Overall, it was a nice place, but the place just cost too much for us. Anyways, we started setting up our tables. I strung some rope from the garage to one of the trees to hang things up. It was forecasted to be a warm and sunny day with no rain, so we brought out as much as we could. Books, electronics, tools, clothing, and various knickknacks. People started trickling in around 9 a.m., and we had a steady stream of people from then on, which was great. Things were being bought constantly, and it just seemed very successful. Right around noon, a guy showed up who immediately made me uneasy. Something was telling me that I needed to keep an eye on this guy. At first, I tried to reason with myself, thinking the worst he could do would be to steal something and take off. Would it be really crappy? Absolutely. But I would only be mad for a bit, and then probably get over it before the end of the day. Either way, I still felt the need to watch him. He was probably in his mid-40s, scruffy looking, and he had a shifty stare that made my skin crawl. He tried to make it look like he was interested in items on display, but I could see past it. He was not interested in these items, but what he was actually interested in, I couldn't guess. At one point, we made eye contact, so I just smiled and nodded, to at least acknowledge that I saw him there. He took it as an invitation to talk to me. "You the owner of this stuff?" he asked me. I told him I was, to which he followed up with asking why we were getting rid of a lot of it. I vaguely mentioned that we were moving and just wanted to get rid of some things. He then started asking more direct and specific questions. First, it was about certain items, like a vase set. He would ask where we got it. I didn't know for sure, but I joked that she probably got it from some home goods store because that was her thing. His interest seemed to peak when I said this, and his questions became less about the items. He asked if she was home, and I just said that she was out getting us lunch. He asked how long we had been together, and what we both did for work. I again gave vague answers, saying that she worked in audits and financing, myself in sales, He asked us if we worked from home, and for this one I straight up lied. I said that we both worked from home full time. There was no way that I was telling this man that my wife occasionally worked from home alone. He finally nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answers, and walked off to fake look at our stuff again. I continued to watch him as that conversation did not help relieve any concerns I had about him. He probably continued to browse at things for another 10 to 15 minutes, talked on the phone for a bit, and then left without purchasing anything. Strange, sure, but I was honestly just relieved that he was gone. As the day went on, we had more people come and go, more purchases being made, and I started to relax a bit more. The guy was nearly out of my mind altogether. But then a bit later, maybe around 4 or 5, I saw a familiar car pull up, and that same guy got out. However, this time he wasn't alone. 2 other men, equally rough and suspicious looking, got out and immediately looked at my house. They weren't scanning the tables and random boxes of items. No, they were staring directly at my house. They definitely did not look like they were there to shop. The problem was that the way they stood towards the end of my driveway, nearly blocking part of it, was making other people obviously uncomfortable, and they were leaving. My wife had gone inside, and once she came back out, I pointed them out to her. I had told her about them when she got back from getting us lunch, and she agreed that she was getting the same bad vibes from them. So we agreed to start packing up early. We started storing stuff in the garage and helped the few people that had stuff in their hands, or were still looking over the stuff still on display. I grabbed the stuff closest to the guys, not wanting my wife to get close, and, man, it was intimidating. I've never been a big guy. In fact, I was fairly thin and tall, but really hardly any muscle to me. When I approached them, they talked quieter, or not at all, like they were trying to be secretive. We didn't have much left, so I just hollered out to the men, "Well, have a good one," and started working on the stuff closer to the garage. And that's when my wife pointed out that the guys had moved up the driveway. As we stood there trying to make ourselves look busy and calm, we really didn't know what to do. Do we start closing the garage, leaving the rest of the stuff outside, and run for the door? It was an attached garage, so if they tried to do something to the door, they could get into our home. I told my wife to go ahead and go stand in the door with her phone, ready to call for help. Worst case scenario, when I heard a familiar voice calling my name. I looked over and saw my neighbor walking up to me, with his big, goofy smile and another guy next to him. I met him by my garage door, and he introduced me to the man that was with him, who turned out to be his brother. He then brought me into the garage and was pointing to something in it when he quietly said, "Everything okay here?" I knew immediately what he was talking about. They'd been watching from his patio and were also growing suspicious of these men. I tried to stay calm and say that I didn't know what to do. Now, he was a larger guy, probably closer to that scruffy guy, but his brother was even bigger. So I was already starting to calm down. His brother walked out and grabbed one of the tables, and as he came back, he asked the men if there was something that they needed. He wasn't really asking. It was more of a, take a hint and get the hell out of here. The guys stared at him for a few seconds, and then finally nodded and got back into their car. His brother then waved them off, and we watched them slowly roll away. My wife came out, and we all stood in the garage and talked about what had happened. I explained when the first guy showed up alone and the strange conversation that we had. He said that he saw him the first time, and when they showed back up, they were really not feeling good about it. We thanked them profusely for coming over, and after they helped us bring in the remaining items, they went back over to his place. We were now back in the safety of our home with all the doors and windows locked. but that paranoia definitely remained. Every time the camera above the garage detected movement, I was checking it, just hoping that it wasn't those guys coming back. Thankfully, it never was. This all happened on a Friday. That Saturday, we set it all up again, our neighbors checking on us throughout the day, and we hoped that they wouldn't show back up. He didn't, and Saturday went fine. Then we had our sale for one more day on Sunday with the same routine. However, of all the cars I saw slow down and check out the sale from the car, there was one that I recognized. It was the guy from Friday. I was immediately on edge, but kept it together as he never stopped, never got out, and he just kept on driving. We kept an eye out for them, and while it was unsettling that he drove by a few times, he never did stop. We packed up what remained on Sunday, and I just remember feeling relieved that the weekend was over, and that we wouldn't have to watch for him again. But then, later that night, while sitting in the living room, I got a camera notification for movement. I checked it, and I saw a car slow to a stop right in front of our driveway. It was the same car. I looked out the front window and saw the car still sitting there, now with the car and all of its lights off. I went back and checked the camera, and the car had been sitting there for 20 minutes. I started to panic a bit. I didn't know what their intentions were, so I called the cops. I told them what was going on and waited for them to arrive. To my surprise and relief, they rolled up without the siren lights, and I'm pretty sure the guy didn't expect it. I watched as the cop parked, now blocking the driveway, and then turned on his lights. The man had started the car, but the cop was already out and walking towards the driver's side. Of course, I couldn't hear what was being said, so after speaking to the guy, the cop then came to our door and talked to us. He said the guy claimed to be lost, and that he was looking for a friend's place, and that he had stopped in our driveway to check if he had the right address. He didn't give us his name, but he did say that the guy didn't have an ID or driver's license on him, so they were holding him to look up his details. We showed him the camera footage to prove that he was the same guy as earlier, and from Friday. They wouldn't tell me too much about the guy, but they did say that he was going with them because of how he was acting, and someone else came to get his car since they couldn't let him drive, since he didn't have an ID. The person that did show up was a middle-aged woman in pajamas, and she did not look happy about the situation. After they all left, I never saw that man, his friends, or the woman ever again. I don't know what his intentions were, but all I could think, with him asking those questions and looking at my house, was that maybe he was casing the place. Maybe he was interested in the stuff that we weren't selling. I was just incredibly thankful for my neighbor and his brother Jim and Greg for coming over. Since we've moved, I've honestly missed living next to him. He was always very kind and watchful for us. I don't know if those guys would have tried something if they hadn't come over, but the thought of it always freaks me out. I'm also very thankful of the camera that we had, and I can promise you, they are set up in our new place too. I just hope those guys never came back, and that they never gave anyone else trouble. I grew up in Belgium, Europe. Since I was young, I've been with my friends in the Scouts. It's mixed in Belgium. We don't have boys and girls apart, usually. We start Scouts when we are 6 years old, and then we go through all the groups until we are 18. That's when we become Scout leaders, usually. I'm saying this to give you a little background on me and my friends. We are people who I would consider close with nature, camping, and overall used to a lot. I would not say we are your typical rough outdoors lumber type of person, but we can manage ourselves well through a forest. Back when we were around 16 years old, one of my friends invited our group to go wild camping in the forest that we have close to our homes. It is not your average American national park, I wish, with stories of Bigfoot or worse. But it definitely has its own charm and legends. We have a centuries-old tale about werewolves in our forest, and a couple of legends about witches. It is not a huge forest, but one can get easily lost if they are not familiar with its trails, and all the trees look the same. This being said, to describe it the best I can, we were very familiar with the forest, since we were small children playing in the tree line and afterwards as teenagers being blindly dropped with nothing but a map in the middle of it by our leaders. I don't know whether this game is popular in other countries to the scouts, but in Belgium, it is very well known and quite safe, actually. We don't have bears, or until a year back, wolves. And when dropped, we would carry lights, so just in case anyone didn't manage his or her way out, they would be spotted easily by a search party. Again, this is not a national park that is so huge a person could go missing for days. That being said again, we were very familiar with the forest, and we were all locals from the village nearby. So, we started our camping journey with our bikes from the village to the entrance of the forest. And, once there, we would continue to the deeper parts of the forest on foot, since it was an area with lots of hills and few trails for bikes. The mood was good. It was beautiful, although a bit cold. It was an autumn evening with few clouds and a beautiful sunset. We hiked our way through the forest until we got to a small clearing with some grass, and prepared our tents for the night. We made a small campfire. We always learned to be safe, never putting in danger in the forest, and ate some beans and sausages for dinner, together with some tasty Belgian beers. Around 11 p.m., we decided to call it a night, and we each went to sleep in our tents and sleeping bags. Everything seemed like a normal camping day in the forest. Then, suddenly, at around 1:30 a.m., we woke up to the sound of what seemed to be like drums. A couple of us got out of our tents with our flashlights asking what was going on. Our forest had always been a quiet place at night, and during the day the only noise you could hear were the critters. So you can imagine the surprise of hearing drums in the middle of the night. We were located on a flat area on the side of a hill, to have a beautiful view in the morning. And at the other side of the hill, over the top, we saw light and smoke of what seemed to be a bonfire. We figured that that had to be the place where the drum noise was coming from. So the ones who had gotten out of our tents decided to just go over there and see what was going on, and maybe talk with the people who decided that it was a good plan to be making noise in a calm forest at 1:30 in the morning. We hiked over the hill so that we could have a glance at the people to know who we were dealing with first. We walked about 15 minutes before we could actually see the bonfire. It was located in a small circled clearing with lots of trees and bushes around. We crouched toward the bushes in the tree line to get a look of what was going on, and that is when we saw the people with the drums. A couple of them, I recall a group of 5 to 6, sat around the fire playing the same tune on the drums the whole time, and another group of people was dancing around the bonfire. Although I say dancing right now, I mean these people were making weird, unnatural movements, almost as if they were having spasms. And honestly, the best way to describe it is bodies contorting. The people dancing around the circles were wearing suits. At first glance would make it look like people dressing to be one with nature, but a second glance would make it look like pagan suits. Almost like the original celebrations of Halloween. See Sam Hain. This was when we realized that whatever these people were doing, whether it was some sort of gag or seriously some sort of ritual, we would be better off if we did not confront them. So we decided to back off and go back to our camping spot as quiet as possible. Once there, we decided to wake the rest and tell them what we had seen. We packed up that same moment and left to the entrance of the forest. We then got on our bikes and all went back home. We have since still frequented the forest, both our scouts and in our free time with our friends and family, and we've never seen this circle of people again. However, it has stuck with me ever since, and I will never forget how we felt out of our place in the forest for the first time in our lives. It's the first time, and luckily the last time, that we did not feel welcome in our own forest. Hello. I'm new to the community, but I joined right after what just happened, and I'm pretty sure I may have encountered something. I've been hiking through forests all day, and I thought I saw something odd out of the corner of my eye earlier. But I figured it was a peaceful entity because I got no weird vibes, and I was walking peacefully and respectfully through the forest. I'm staying in a little pension B&B type place, and I started feeling really off. And my general vibe was weird, so I wanted to reset by meditating in their garden. While looking at the stars and stating my wishes and goals during my mindfulness process, I start hearing what sounds to be a cat yowling. And I'm one to always help an animal in need, but this yowling started to echo and sound really odd. Almost distorted and really messed up, so I immediately went back inside. What makes this even more creepy, which is why I came in here to get opinions rather than just move on from it and go to sleep, is that my mom, who I am here with, saw something earlier and yelled, "What the hell is that?" And she said that she saw a fox, mink, rat creature underneath a stop sign. She later described it as a cat, but really low to the ground. But I live in the Czech Republic, and you don't really see minks around here. Me and my brother were confused because we didn't see anything, and then she said, "Let me go up to it. Maybe I can scare it." And keep in mind, I think she's pretty in touch with good and bad omens. She's a powerful woman, and won't take crap from anyone if she doesn't want them to. And she would never want to scare a random innocent creature. But I gather that her intuition told her that running up to it and scaring it away was the right thing to do. Because then she said that it scurried into the bushes. Supposedly. I never saw it, nor heard it. Another neighbor later asked us if we were looking for a cat, which means that this howling was the third or fourth connection to something weird. So maybe when I was alone outside, this entity thought that it could get my attention through howling and sounding like it was in pain? I don't know exactly, but I did know to come inside immediately, because that howling was demonic, and I did not want to help whatever sound was coming from multiple directions. Opinions? If my siblings or cousins listen to your videos, they'll recognize this story. My grandma used to tell us 2 horror stories every year for Halloween pizza parties. I always thought they were fake. One was about a Ouija board, and another about her grandfather. The stories never changed or faltered in description, and she never told us any other horror stories. Only those 2. My mother told me a few years later that my grandma, Luna, only tells these 2 horror stories because they really happened to her. So here's the grandfather one. When Luna was little, in the range of like 5 to 7 years old, she loved to be around her grandpa. He would visit Luna a few times a week. Every visit, he would put Luna on his lap and read her a book of her choice. This was her favorite activity that they did together. Her grandpa died not long after. Her parents knew how much Luna loved her grandpa, so they didn't tell her that her grandpa passed away. Not knowing that grandpa died, Luna continued to see him a few times a week, and would sit on his lap and he would read her a book. One of the evenings Grandpa was visiting Luna, her mom was making dinner in the other room. "Who are you talking to, Luna?" her mother asked. "I'm talking to Grandpa," Luna replied. "Grandpa's not with us anymore, sweetie. He passed away." When Luna went to the kitchen to confirm with her mom that her grandpa was dead, she couldn't find him after that. He never returned to read her a story. The Ouija board story is a little bit more out there. The story was the reason I thought my grandma made these stories up. While I think this could have happened to her, I think some of the story is exaggerated. My grandma Luna was never super religious, until she got older. One thing she did know when she was young was that Ouija boards were evil. Her mother banned Luna and her brother, Sol, from ever bringing a Ouija board into their home. Well, when you're a kid and told you can't do something, you're going to do that very thing. Sol brought home a Ouija board. Luna and Sol tried out the board, and when they asked, "Is anyone here with us?" they received an answer. Goaway. Go away. Sol and Luna didn't listen. "Who are we speaking to?" LEAVEDONTUSCTHEBOARD. Leave. Don't use the board. They were creeped out and decided to bury the Ouija board in the back of the closet, where their mother couldn't see it. Sol and Luna forgot about the Ouija board for a few months, until Sol suggested they should use the Ouija board again. "Okay," replied Luna. A few minutes later, while Luna was busy doing something else, she heard a scream from the hallway. "Sol?" Sol came out running down the hallway. "Don't go in the study," he screamed. "Why?" "When I pulled out the Ouija board, there was a ghostly white woman in a dress with a broken jaw. She was hanging from the ceiling by a noose and said to leave. I threw the Ouija board into the study and slammed the door. I will never go back in there." And while my grandmother never saw the ghost, she swears that her brother never stepped foot in the study again. And they did get in trouble for the Ouija board. I know these stories aren't long, but I truly believe that my grandma did sit on her grandpa's lap multiple times after he passed away. Her stories never changed like a made-up one would. They never evolved or got more detailed. They always stayed the same. Hi, Raven. I hope that you share my story. Everyone thinks it was just a dream, but I was awake at the time. My parents were renting an old house from the 50s. I had my first room upstairs next to my parents'. Unfortunately, I moved later to the basement, which was also an active place, of course. I'm 19 years old in my room, on my airbed reading R.L. Stine book called The Room. I even remember the cover's picture. It was about a ghost trapped in an upstairs attic room, which was sealed shut tight. The spirit wandered out of the room and would act friendly to the main character in the hopes of coaxing them to open the sealed door. Eventually, the ghost in the story got her way and was released. The ghost ended up evil and tried to kill the main character in the book. I finished the book that night. I looked at the clock, and it was 3 in the morning. Yikes. I'd best get to sleep. My parents hated it when I would stay up super late and would hassle me, so I put my head down instantly. I was still awake and feeling like I was going to fall asleep soon, but my skin tingled, and the hair on the back of my neck went straight up, and I shot up right from my airbed. Something wasn't right. My vision was fuzzy from it being dark in my room, but I saw distinctively a swirling black smoke enter my room from the ajar door. It was seconds of seeing it, and I put my head down again on my pillow trying to pretend I was asleep. I did that a lot during my childhood years. I have many stories, but this one was the worst yet. This was different, and I knew it instantly. I never felt such a presence of pure evil before, and it's the most terrifying thing I ever felt. It was ancient. I can't describe it with words. The swirling smoke was the darkest and blackest thing I have ever seen. It reminded me of something as black and dark from the black sky at night, but blacker still. The smoke was something truly evil. When people speak about evil, it's superficial. However, this thing was a real source of evil. The fear was pure, and the ice-cold feeling went up and down my spine. I never felt such powerful evil and terror. This thing I knew was here because I allowed it somehow. Maybe it was the book that I had finished reading. I opened a portal of something that shouldn't exist in this world. This thing swirled around me entirely while I laid on my airbed. Instantly, I couldn't breathe. My breath was no more. I could not breathe, but I dared not move. I'm not kidding when I said I felt pure evil and terror. This thing was evil. It exists. So I wouldn't move. I was terrified beyond comprehension. However, it was trying to kill me. I felt the airbed shift from my weight, and I felt myself slowly raising from my airbed. I was levitating longitude/horizontal. I remember feeling frozen in place. I only had my thoughts. I couldn't fight back with movement. I could not speak or make any sound to alarm my parents. I called in my thoughts to my mother. Mom. But nothing. Couldn't breathe, couldn't move. An evil surrounded me as thick as oil. Then I knew who to call next. It's a power that is purely good. True light and pure light. I put all my love and trust into the universe and screamed in my head, God. I felt a protective shield wash over me, and I felt myself being slowly lowered back onto my airbed. It squeaked and shifted from my weight, and I could breathe again. It was gone. The evil had left. I like to occasionally check out yard and estate sales for unique and unusual stuff. Having a weird brass animal wearing something silly sitting on my entertainment center has always been a good conversation piece when I have friends over. Sometimes I'll follow the signs I see along the side of the roads, or some I'll find that are posted on things like Facebook or Nextdoor. This time, I had actually been going on a walk with my dog when I saw a sign for a local sale. I carry a small fanny pack at all times. It's my purse, and it holds my small wallet with my cards and cash. I keep cash on me because I spontaneously go to these sales as much as I do, as well as carrying my keys, my dog bags, and other various things. So, I was prepared to stop at the sale, too. It was a nice day, and when I arrived, there were already several people walking around and browsing the items. I saw a few things that looked interesting, but then I got to a box full of CDs and another full of vinyl records. I love vinyls. I love the way they sound, even if it's music that I wasn't interested in. I even collected ones that were damaged and beyond repair. Those I liked to hang on the walls in my living room. They looked much better than the ugly rental beige colors of the walls. I looked through the CDs as there was a man looking through the vinyls. I ended up finding a few that I was interested in for 25 cents each, so why not snatch them up? Once the man walked away, I then looked through the vinyls myself. I pulled a few out and was looking at the sleeve for details and lists of songs when an older man approached me. He was the owner, and he started a conversation about the vinyls and asked me about my preferences. As we spoke, I noticed the man that was previously looking at them was pacing around us, and was unfortunately distracting me. The owner noticed as well, and he looked up at the man, and the three of us all talked about the vinyls some. The man asked if I was looking at buying any, and I stepped back, saying I was unsure of what I wanted yet, and motioned for him to go through it again if he wanted to. He began talking with us about what he had and why he was selling them. I actually found one by my favorite musician, so I was holding on to it, when the man started asking me what my favorite song was by them. And he seemed surprised when I said that it was one that wasn't common or popular. You know the type. You wear the band shirt, and you get questioned about your loyalty to said band. Anyways, they talked for a few moments, so I glanced back over at the CDs, when the man said there truly was a great collection in there, and that I should buy them up, and then walked away, holding on to a few of the vinyls. I went to look back through them, with the owner still standing nearby. I was finding myself grabbing several more of them, when the owner said that I could just have the whole box for $5. I was ecstatic. Even if they didn't work, or were bands that I didn't know or care for, I knew that I could make good use of them. So, after asking if he was sure, I pulled out a $10 bill instead and thanked him. I'm not very good at bartering, as you can probably tell. But they all looked to be in great condition, and he was nice, so it was fair in my opinion. His wife even gave me a large beach tote to carry them all in, since I was walking home, so I didn't have to lug around a big box. I paid, thanked them again, and headed off. But before I left, I started feeling like I was being watched. So I looked back, and I saw that the other man was now staring at me. He seemed to be clenching his teeth, as I could see his jaw and temples bulging. He looked mad. But at the time, I didn't really think anything of it. Not like I had done anything to him, so I continued walking. On my walk back, my dog would look back behind us and then keep walking. But his stops were becoming more and more frequent. Finally, I looked over my shoulder to see what had his attention, but I was not expecting what I saw. It was the same guy from the yard sale, but he was empty-handed. Didn't he buy a few of the records? I had walked past a bus stop, and the man was now standing at it, so I honestly didn't think that he was following me. He just happened to be taking the bus, and that's where the stop was. My dog, Rocky, he was a rescue, but he kept part of his old life in him, which was a guard dog. He was treated well, but he was very protective over me, which I think is why he was watching him so much. He's fine with people and actually quite friendly, but he always seemed more on edge when it was just me and someone else, especially men. It took him a while to get used to my boyfriend, so I just assumed that he was in guard mode. I just took a moment to pet him, tell him that it was okay, and we kept moving. If he saw that I was comfortable and not scared, he typically loosened up as well. We walked a little further when Rocky again stopped, and this time his tail was down and he was starting to do a soft growl. I immediately turned around, and to my surprise, that same man was still behind us. Now, I was starting to get curious. I had never seen this man before in my neighborhood, and now he was heading for it, after going to the same yard sale that I had been to. I'm pretty sure he was at the sale before I was, so I know that he didn't follow me there, but why was he going this way now? So, I decided to try and test him. I live on a cul-de-sac, so instead of going straight up that street, I cut through a small park, which would then lead not only to another set of homes, but also into part of my backyard. My thought was, unless this guy lived in one of those homes behind the park, or he was going to that park, he had no reason to cut through there, which would confirm if he was following me. So, I picked up my pace a bit, and motioned to Rocky that we needed to hurry. If I give him 2 quick pats on the back and say, "Come on," he knows that means to speed up. I think this also told him that something was wrong because he would walk further ahead of me and watch behind me until I caught up. We got through the park, and I heard the crunch of gravel as he continued to walk through it. And once I made it past the first house, we ran. I again told Rocky to come on, and he began running with me. I tried to zigzag through the houses, hoping no one would come out and yell at me for being in their yard, until I reached my backyard. Instead of going through the front door, I went through the back, locked it, and then closed the blinds. After dropping the bag and the leash, I cracked open the blinds to see if I could see the guy, and sure enough, I did. Thankfully, he did not see me, though. He was looking at one of the houses I had circled, but he was watching it intently. I'm pretty sure he was thinking that I went into it by the way he was looking at it. So now I was curious, and yeah, pretty alarmed that this guy was obviously following me. I would like to think I would have noticed, but if not for Rocky, I'm not so sure that I would have. Anyway, I calmed myself down by calling my boyfriend and telling him what had happened, and he suggested that I call the cops. I told him that if I continued to see him around that I would, but since he seemed to walk away, or at least out of sight, I wanted to let it go. I know that that was probably stupid. Later that night, I was relaxing in the living room, doing not much of anything. My living room has one window that has a dark and heavy curtain on it, and I typically kept it closed because it faced the sun, and it would get really hot in the room when it was open. My front door also has a small window on it, but it was frosted over so you couldn't see in or out. However, you could see light, and it grabbed my attention when I saw my porch light kick on. It was motion censored. I was not expecting anyone, as my boyfriend wasn't coming over that day, so I had no idea who it could have been. But I also didn't have time to react because immediately after, they started banging violently on my door. Between the banging and my yelping, Rocky was on all fours barking and snarling at the door. Whoever it was started yelling at me to open the door. Like hell I was going to do that. I grabbed my cell phone and yelled for Rocky as I ran to the back door and called the cops. They kept me on the phone until the police arrived, but it certainly didn't make me feel any safer, as I relayed everything that was happening to the operator. He would bang on the door, bang on the window, and he would even walk around and bang on the windows all around my house, making me panic more. Did I actually have all the windows locked? There was no way he could get in, right? After what felt like an eternity, the operator told me that the police were there, and I could hear other people's voices shouting. After a while, someone came to my door and identified themselves as the police, so I opened it. The cop explained to me what the man had told him, and without seeing who it was, I knew who it was. It was the guy from the yard sale. He had told the cops that I stole the records from the sale, and that I ran home with them, which is why he was there now. Once he mentioned the records, I figured it all out. I was so confused, but also angry. He looked at those records twice, and then he encouraged me to buy them before walking away. Now he's telling the police that I stole them? And what was I supposed to do? I got them from a yard sale, so it's not like I had a receipt or any proof of purchase. However, the cop was very kind. She explained that the burden of proof was on him, that he had to show proof that he owned them, and, well, he couldn't. I even told them the place that I got them from so I could go back the next day, even with them, to prove that I bought them. But they said that it wasn't necessary. They went back to talk to him, and after some time, they came back to me, since I said that I wouldn't press charges to update me on the situation. The man was told that he needed to leave then, and that if he came back, he would be charged with trespassing. Part of me even considered for a moment just giving him the records, if it would diffuse the situation. If that would just make him go away, I was willing to do it. But then I started thinking. This man was so angry about this that he was willing to follow me home. either leave and come back or then linger around for hours, terrify me and my dog, and then accuse me of stealing them? Why should I? If he even approached me during the sale about wanting one or something, I wouldn't have bought them. In fact, I only did so because the owner offered me the whole collection. So, yeah, maybe some people would find it petty of me, but I decided against it. Once the police left, I called my boyfriend again and told him about what happened. He ended up coming over that night after all. I had no other events that evening or afterwards either, thankfully. I was still in a mix of emotions from that experience. Angry that he accused me of stealing, terrified that he was willing to follow me home and do God knows what if he got in, and confused that this was all over a few records at a yard sale. Some people are just too much for me, and it gives me all the more reason to love living alone with my dog. The following account is based on real events which occurred in the late summer of 1991, experienced by my late wife and myself in my father's home while he was away. He would not speak of the matter when he returned, but indicated that he had experiences with the same entity. Awakened from her dreams and startled, she found her movements heavy and labored. Her foggy eyes slowly focused in the dimly lit room upon a large, dark figure. It stood over us on the opposite side of the bed, looking down on me, her husband, as I lay sleeping beside her. A shadow of a form. It was sinister and foreboding, undefined and yet solid. She felt its overpowering gaze but could see no discernible face, just blackness, deep and bottomless. It had no features save a form suggestive of a tall man in a long trench coat wearing what appeared to be a fedora on his head. At that moment, the thing realized that she was awake and its attention immediately fell upon her. She remembered the gun in the nightstand beside her, but was unable to move to roll over and grab it. Frozen, not by fear, but by some force she sensed was coming from the shadow. It then moved, silence to the foot of the bed just beyond her feet. It did not appear to walk, but floated across the floor with no perceptible movement. It stared faceless directly at her for endless moments, and then turned and glided through the bedroom door and down the hall, and out of sight. In the instant that she no longer saw the shadowy figure, she was able to move. I then awoke, oblivious to what had just occurred, to discover her wandering through the house with our small derringer. When I confronted her, she fell into my arms trembling and breathlessly told me what she had just experienced. I was quite skeptical of it all, and ushered her back to the bed, putting the gun away but leaving a light on. As we sat on the bed, the dog, who had remained asleep throughout the incident, awoke and became extremely agitated. He jumped off of the bed and barked, frightened and angry, into the empty dark corner of the bedroom. With much coaxing and reassurance, eventually he was made to return to the foot of the bed and laid down whimpering. We attempted to lie back down and turned the lamp off, leaving the room still dimly lit by the light in the hallway. The dog then slid off of the foot of the bed and slammed down on the floor as if he was thrown down, like someone had spiked a football. He ran yelping out of the room and hid under the coffee table in the living room. He would not come out until the next morning, and then for only moments at a time. We moved out into the living room for the rest of the night, her now very frightened and confused, and myself now believing her account of what had occurred while I slept. She was convinced that what she had seen was a demon, or a malevolent spirit of some kind. We didn't sleep that night, of course, as we spent the time recounting what had happened and praying. We wondered if there was a connection to the odd occurrences in the house that we now recalled, such as lights going on and off by themselves, cupboards slamming in the middle of the night, strange noises, the odd sign that someone had carved into the step outside the garage when the cement had been wet, many years before my father had moved in. and a strange rust-tinged spot on the ceiling of the laundry room that would always bleed back through, despite being painted over many times. The next morning, we told my mother what had occurred, and she contacted a friend of hers who then came and anointed and blessed the house and all the portals. We all prayed together and experienced no further incident for several days. Some nights later, I was awakened once again by my wife frantically shaking me. She whispered to me, "It's here again in the room. There, in the shadow." I looked at the spot that she was pointing on the wall and thought that I saw movement in the shadow cast by the plant. Not being sure of what I was seeing, I looked about the room to see if there was a breeze, maybe moving the plant. There was none. We both saw it then. The shadowed form of what appeared to be a man dashed across the wall from one shadow to another as if attempting to hide within them. We didn't sleep any further that night and spent the rest of the dark hours with every light on in the house and consuming many cups of coffee, while she recounted to me how she was again made aware of the presence of the Shadow Man. It had laid upon her this time. She was awakened by the pressure of a heavy body on hers. She had at first thought that it had been me, but when she opened her eyes and saw nothing yet was still being pinned down, she tried to fight back. She wasn't sure if what she heard next had been heard out loud with her ears or was something inside of her head. It growled. A guttural, vicious growl from somewhere dark and angry, and whispered in her ear, "Thanks for the job, babe." The weight on top of her then left, and she saw its shadowy form dash into the shadows on the wall. It was then that she was able to wake me. We gathered our nerves in the light of day, as that had brought a calming to the strange occurrences in the past. Exhausted and confused, I grabbed her and held her tightly in the hallway. Something in my peripheral vision caught my attention over her shoulder, and I turned to look at the bedroom window where I noticed something seemed to be written in the dust on the glass, where I was certain there had been nothing just moments before. We went closer and saw that, from the outside, there was written in the window dust a strange sign, a sigil that looked both arcane and ominous. There were two side by side, a small one and a larger one. The sight of them filled us both with dread, and a sick, empty feeling settled throughout our bodies. Not knowing what to do at this point, I took her outside and we confirmed that the gates to the backyard remained locked, as did the yard of the woman next door, which had to be passed through to get to our yard, as this place was a duplex. Further, the window that showed the strange markings was over 7 feet high off the ground. I held her up and told her to rub out the small symbols and draw a small heart next to where it had been. I then stretched up and did the same with the larger symbol, leaving a larger heart next to the spot where it had been. We felt a little better after this and went back inside. We went into the bedroom and embraced, drained and bewildered. Both of us finally feeling relief and taking comfort in the safety of each other's arms. She wept softly, and we could hear our hearts beating against one another. Then she saw it, and let loose an anguished wail so chilling that the reason for it still haunts me to this day. On the window behind me there was now one large broken heart, and the ones that we had drawn moments ago were rubbed out. At that point, we knew for sure that this was something far beyond our understanding. We gathered a select group, blessed the house, anointed the portals, and desperately prayed together once more. There were no further major events after that day, except the usual door slamming and cupboards found open, lights turning on and off, and odd noises in the night. From that point on, until we moved away, soon after, we would not sleep or remain in a room without at least one light on. We tried to reason why something so extreme had just stopped as suddenly as it had started. We felt watched until the day we left that place. The Shadow Man was never seen again by either one of us, but we never believed that it had left. The fear was now a part of us forever, no matter how deep we tried to bury it. I was working for a hospital system that included 2 adult hospitals and 1 children's hospital, all connected by ground floor tunnels and/or sky bridges. I was at the children's hospital all day this day, and on their trauma team, they got the Level 1 center, which means they deal with life-threatening emergency situations. Stabbings, gunshots, and serious auto accidents, etc. The day was so slow and nothing was happening. A good thing. I knew I should seize the opportunity to get my second shift lunch, and as we had not been busy, a medtech and I had talked our heads off about crazy happenings, like this show does, and we related many strange happenings. I told her that I had a bizarre ability to know when people touched something of mine. She looked at me, probably doubting my sanity. I thought, at the time at least. When my dinner time arrived, I went across the pedway to another hospital that was physically connected but not related. We'd always think the lunches were better at the other hospitals. We'd see a mass migration from theirs to our hospital and ours to theirs. So the pedways were literally several blocks long, and therefore contained necessary emergency phones. Suddenly, I stopped dead center in the pedway and dialed the 4 numbers to reach the lab, and the medtech answered. I said, "Put my rosary back into my purse," and yes, I felt it. She was super freaked out about how I could have possibly known. Well, I told her. So, this isn't something I witnessed. I was told this story by one of the men who allegedly saw it. For context, this guy had run with some questionable crowds, and did what jobs he had to do to make money at times, if you get my drift. So he has a lot of stories. I mostly consider this a tall tale, but there is still enough of it that makes me wonder, what if? According to him, we'll call him Zed for the sake of the story, he had been finishing up some work down in Louisiana back in the late 1990s, with his buddy, and had a few days to kill. Namely to get some fishing and hunting in, albeit out of season. One of the guys they had worked with gave them directions to a spot way back in the swamps and marshes, or the bayou as it's more commonly called, where they could do that without risking being caught by fish and game agents. He said that one of the best things about the spot was that there were, oddly enough, never any alligators there. Bit of a red flag, that one. Anyways, one fine morning they set out in their boat before the sun was up, navigating their way through the swamps. From what he described, this was a section that was close to the Mississippi border, routes used by smugglers to move various products across state lines. They finally arrived at the spot after a few hours and some detours, their way of not saying they got lost, and turned off the motor of their boat and started fishing. The trees were just thick enough to prevent you from being seen from overhead, and they were essentially in a huge inlet that was somewhat sheltered by the rest of the bayou, and had the start of solid land along 2 sides of it. By solid land, that also meant you had to walk across 10 to 15 feet of muck that could suck your boots off before you got to the solid ground. So, according to Zed, the day was progressing and fishing was not going great. But they still had beer, so they weren't inclined to go anywhere. They both noted that, as the guy had said, there were no alligators. Normally you could spot them lurking around, or sunning themselves, but they were just utterly gone from the spot, as were most of the big fish, it seemed. It was at this point that they observed a herd of feral hogs emerge from the undergrowth on one side of the lagoon and make their way to the muck that was described before, and commence to start rolling and rooting in it to their heart's content. Zed and his buddies slowly angled their boat closer, as they had sidearms with them and certainly had no issues with getting wild pork instead of fish, if the opportunity was there. The hogs were leery, but not afraid, keeping the humans in their line of sight as they frolicked. Zed saw that they had no real way to get to a hog if they shot it there, so They just floated along and watched for a good opportunity. But instead, they saw something else entirely. According to Zed, that's when they saw the mud start to move. He knew instantly that it was not an alligator, as an alligator would be flailing around in the mud trying to reach the hogs. And whatever this thing was, it was covered in mud. The only way he could describe it was something was pushing its way through the muck, like a mostly submerged bulldozer, creeping up on the pigs. They watched as it slowly approached a cluster of hogs who had noticed the movement, but seemed more curious about what it was than afraid. One of them, a pig that Zed estimated was between 150 to 175 pounds, was the furthest out in the muck, and made the mistake of attempting to sniff at whatever this intruder was. Zed said that quicker than they could react, something lunged out from the thing and attached to the pig's head and face. As the pig thrashed and tried to jump back, letting out the most blood-curdling scream they'd ever heard, the thing was hauled partially out of the muck and came into better view. Zed realized it was an alligator snapping turtle of proportions that he had never heard of. He's seen the one they keep at Bass Pro Shop that got big enough that it cracked its tank, and they had to get a new one. And he said that was like comparing a chihuahua to a pit bull. It was still partially obscured by the muck that was covering it, but Zed swore its shell had to be at least the size of a hood from a Volkswagen Beetle. He was an extreme car enthusiast, so he knew his vehicles. His best guess on its weight was that it was well over 500 pounds, and was now backing up into deeper water, dragging the pig with it. Zed said from what they could see, the turtle's head was so big that it was able to fit its jaws partially around the pig's skull, and its beak was now essentially acting as a meat hook. Apparently, it was about a 30-second fight to drag the pig out of the lagoon, but Zed said it was clear the pig never had a chance. The turtle dragged it out into the water, and the pig made one last desperate attempt to break free. Apparently, hearing something screaming underwater one last time is as unnerving as you would imagine, and Hollywood does not get the sound right. It then just went absolutely quiet after that. According to Zed, he and his buddy sat there for a minute processing what they had seen, and except for the froth on top of the water and the stirred-up mud, there was no sign that anything had just happened. The other hogs had fled as soon as their comrade was attacked, and except for some bugs, it was almost completely silent. They couldn't say why, but Zed said they booked it out of there, that something was off, and it felt wrong to be there. It wasn't like they could go to Fish and Game and describe what they saw, but they did fill in their acquaintance on why there were no alligators in that area. As far as Zed knew, nobody else has ever seen this colossal turtle, and came forward to talk about it. But Zed said that it was big enough that if it caught a person unaware, it could easily overpower and kill a human the same way it did that pig. Again, this is how the story was told to me. It's not my story, and I'm inclined to mostly believe it's a tall tale, or an exaggerated one, but it does highlight that you don't need something as fanciful as a skunk ape or Bigfoot to be nervous about what might be lurking out of sight. I'm going on vacation out of country on Sunday, and I was packing my bag today to go visit my family for the weekend, a few hours away from where I go to college. I went to put my retainer in the bag, and my case was in the usual spot, but it was empty. So I tore my entire room apart. Nothing. Then I asked my girlfriend to come over. We searched my entire house high to low for an hour, and still nothing. I had to leave as I was heading out of town, so my girlfriend stayed and looked for another 3 hours, and she found absolutely nothing. And I mean as far as every item of clothing and every drawer, garbages, under furniture, and side furniture, and completely tore the two beds apart. I am absolutely so confused. I only live with my girlfriend. I didn't wear my retainer for the last couple of nights because I've been sick, and I never bring it out of the house. I definitely wore it a couple of evenings ago because we both remember me wearing it, but not while I was sick. And if I did wear it, it was not out of the house. I haven't worn it out of the house in years. We've had no visitors come. Our house is very clean and organized, and we completely flipped over every piece of it. And now I'm feeling paranoid that I'm either losing my mind or I have, like, a ghost. My hairdryer and perfume went missing in the last 2 weeks as well, but I assumed I left it home at my parents' house. Guess I'll find out soon. And I'm not saying it's not a theft, but we have security cameras, and my town is extremely small. Crime rate is extremely low. It's not even existent. I lock my doors every day when I go to work, and nobody's living in our basement or walls. I would be shocked if somebody broke into my house to steal a used retainer. I'm just so confused. It started with me getting home from a hot day in the sun from working all day. I was very exhausted, so I decided to lay down. I didn't sleep too long. I woke up, I felt really thirsty, so I went into the kitchen to grab a glass. I filled my glass halfway with water. I won't drink a whole glass of water at the moment. I didn't drink it up to this day. I don't know why I didn't drink it then, but instead I put it down. I walked to the living room to get to my bedroom. I had to walk through my sister's room, and as I walked through the room, my sister and her boyfriend were sitting there chatting. I said hey, but they continued to chat like they couldn't hear me, so I just ignored it. When I got into the living room, forgetting what I had come in there for, I just said screw it, I'm going back to bed. I'm tired. As I walked back through the room, I was like, hey, y'all, yeah, again. And they ignored me. I thought they were just being funny. I said I'm too tired for this, so I turned around and I looked at the glass of water. I said that I really needed to drink it because I was thirsty, so I drank the water that I put down on the counter. As I walked into my room, I turned to look at my bed, and I could see myself there. I saw my whole body lying on the bed. I got scared. I jumped back as I did. I felt myself wake up, and it felt like a nightmare. It was like that was the craziest dream that I have ever had, so I got up to go to the bathroom. I walked through the kitchen and noticed that the glass was still there, but was empty where I drank my water. I said, that's weird, but maybe somebody else put it there after they drank some water. But why in the same spot? So I walked back into my sister's room again, and there they were all chatting, and I said, did y'all hear me a while ago? They were like, no, we didn't hear anything. So it freaked me out that they were actually talking to me now. I then go back to my room, and I sit on my bed and wonder, was I dreaming? But if I was, why was the cup in the same spot that I left it? As a disclaimer, please do not try this, ever. Knowing what I know now, this is probably one of the most idiotic things I have ever done. I not only put myself in danger, but also my family and friends. Also, this happened about 15 years ago, so I will relay all that my memory serves me. I'm no longer in contact with the friend that this story involves, so forgive me if I forget any details. I will be happy to answer any questions I can, and will try my best to write everything that I can remember, in the order in which it happened. And that being said, when I was a teenager, I was obsessed with the paranormal. My high school buddies and I thought it would be a great idea to get stoned in my parents' garage and construct a Ouija board. It was after school one afternoon when we implemented our plan. We arrived at my parents' house and got right to work finding supplies to make the board, and if I remember correctly, found an old shot glass to use as the planchette. We decided to ask the most provoking questions you could think of. Everything the internet told us never to ask whatever was on the other side. But we wanted a big response. We wanted something crazy to happen. We got a response almost instantly, and we each thought the others were moving the planchette to mess with us. But we were soon to find out that it was real. I believe I was the one asking most of the questions. I remember asking, "When did you die?" The planchette moved to the numbers that we scrawled on the board. The exact year escapes me, but it was something in the late 1980s. I know I asked the spirit's name. I cannot remember the name, so we'll just call the spirit, or rather demon, as we would soon discover, Robert. Robert would not disclose how he died, although he did say that his favorite band was Nirvana. This will be relevant later. We had a classic rock mix playing in the background, and he seemed to enjoy this. Unfortunately, I do not remember most of the conversation, but I do remember we didn't say goodbye when the session concluded. That night, my friends left, except for one who stayed the night. We'll call her Jane. For this part, I'll need to describe the layout of the house. It was an old house with a weird setup. When you would enter through the front door, there was a medium-sized living room with a huge bay window facing the street. Going further into the house, on the left was the kitchen. Beyond that was a glass door, behind which was a sort of a family room. And then the backyard, which led to the garage. Jane and I were chilling in the kitchen later that night, and we were seated at the kitchen table. Jane was sitting with her back towards the glass door that leads to the family room, and I was facing her and the door. We were chatting quietly, as my family was sleeping. She was talking, and as I was looking at her, something behind her caught my eye. The glass door was cracked open, but it was slowly opening wider and wider. As soon as I pointed at the door and she turned to look, it slammed shut very forcefully. It was so damn loud that I was sure my parents would wake up and we would be in trouble. But no one woke up or yelled at us to be quiet. We got so freaked out, we quickly retreated to my room, past the front living room. We talked in my room for quite some time, and nothing else weird happened until we went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange, slow scratching noise. At first, I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. I don't think Jane woke up, so I got up and tried to decipher where the sound was coming from. Finally, I realized it was coming from my closet. The door was closed, and I knew that there was nothing in there that should be making that noise. The only pet that we had in the house was an old border collie, and he slept in my parents' room at the end of the hall. I jumped back into bed and threw the covers over my head and tried to ignore the sounds coming from the closet. I don't know how long it took for me to get back to sleep, or if I even did, but the next thing I knew, it was morning, and Jane had to go back home later that day. We decided to go to the garage to smoke, and the air felt so heavy as soon as we stepped inside. Like we shouldn't be in there even though we chilled in that garage countless times before. We went back in the house and sat on the couch in the living room. We were either talking or watching TV, but I think at that point I went into some sort of trance. Jane later told me that I suddenly stopped responding to her and I wasn't moving, even though my eyes were open. The only thing I remember before coming to was the feeling of the back of the couch sinking in. I felt as though I was being slowly sucked into the couch, and my back felt so hot. It was like there was fire getting closer and closer to my back. Then, right before I snapped out of it, I felt hands on me, like they were trying to grab and pull me even further into the couch. I know it sounds dumb, but I thought I was being pulled into hell. I'm aware that there's no demonic portal in my parents' couch that leads to hell, but I swear to you that this is what it felt like. When I finally snapped out of it, Jane was looking at me with a look of concern on her face, and I felt like I was having a panic attack. I can't remember much after that, but her parents arrived to pick her up a short time later and she left. That night, I was absolutely terrified to sleep in my room. So, being the dumbass that I am, I decided I would crash on the hell couch with the TV on all night. I didn't think that I would sleep, but at some point, I must have fallen asleep. I don't know what time it was when I suddenly woke up with a jolt. The TV I know for a fact I left on was now turned off. In its reflection, I could see the bay window slightly illuminated by the streetlight outside. Then, I noticed it. A figure standing behind me so tall that it touched the ceiling. Its head and neck craned down to stare at me. It was so black that it was darker than everything else in the room, and it was motionless. I was too scared to move. I just feigned to still be asleep. I don't remember slipping back into slumber, but just like the previous night, before I knew it, it was morning again. I decided to take a shower. Upon undressing, I noticed that my side was sore and hurting pretty bad when I took off my shirt. I looked, and there were deep scratches in the shape of the Nirvana logo. That wonky-looking smiley face. At that point, I knew that this wasn't just a spirit that I was dealing with. I don't know why I never told my parents what was going on, but one day my dad, who didn't even believe in the paranormal, told me he was taking a shower when all of a sudden the faucet turned on its own, and the water got hot so suddenly that it scalded him. Now I was pissed. I had allowed a demon to mess with my family. I promised myself I would never mess with a Ouija board or even be around one ever again. I begged a Catholic friend of mine to come over and bless the house and garage, and she agreed. She brought a bunch of supplies for the blessing. Afterwards, we disposed of the board and we prayed. Nothing happened in that house ever again, and we ended up moving a couple of years later. As an adult, I became a Christian. I've still had experiences with the paranormal after this story, but now I know that I'm protected and how to rid demonic energy from my life. I'm sorry if this ending is anticlimactic, and also for the length of the story, but thank you for listening. This is a story from when I was in campus security, which is a career that I had for a couple of years. I am a female, 5 foot 5 inches tall. When I was interviewed for the job, I had no prior experience, but had a very eclectic resume. I had graduated from that university, I could write a timed report of my completion of assigned duties easily, and happened to be a person who is observant. When I was 6, they realized I sat in the front of the class so I could see well, but I still couldn't see. I sat nearby a girl with thick little glasses who also had issues with chalkboards and overhead projectors. I could always see the smallest details on a butterfly's wings, but not past my arm's length, but nobody really knew it. Now, I rode my bicycle with a banana seat and stingray handlebars, and I mean all over. When I look back on what I could not see, it was downright scary. I learned details all around me, but the world beyond a few feet coalesced into a soft, impressionistic blur. I had to know a friend by the way that they walked, and it seemed to sharpen my ears to music and voices more. One grade school day, our teacher took us into the school library to learn how to find a book with the godforsaken Dewey Decimal System. I understood the concept, but never wore the ugly little glasses that I'd finally gotten. They embarrassed me. The teacher gave each student a book to go find, and I literally prayed for help because I could not read the huge letters over the shelves, directing us to be able to find the right book. That was the problem. It was now or never. I slapped out my right hand, and boom, it was the right book. I was praised for such stunning speed. I knew that I didn't know crap about what I was doing. My hand just went there, and has since. Later years, I heard of blind people who could literally read with their fingertips, and not Braille either, but a normal book. I had to believe that. But by the time I'd moved forward in time, I'd now had LASIK, which was like being reborn with perfect vision. I say all this because I had honed my senses from early on in life until about 17, by not being able to see properly. Now I had 20/20 vision, and I became extremely observant with my hearing and sight, and so it served me well in security for sure. I'd always noticed a crucial detail that nobody paid any attention to. One day I realized when someone had committed a crime on campus. I could touch the thing and see something or feel something. Know something. I didn't mention it because people always think some things are weird, so to me they're just natural, so I don't mention it. I even learned how to sense when some people were trustworthy to even mention something paranormal, and I really don't like that term. I did have a good 2 years in security due to enhanced observation, maybe we should call it, making Officer of the Month 3 times, and it wasn't given out lightly. When I later opened my own security systems business, I would already know where the person had broken in before, to the customer's amazement. So, trust your instincts and the non-voice in your head, and just go with it. If it feels dangerous, then it is. This happened in the late spring, early summer when I was in the 4th or 5th grade. I grew up about 20 minutes from my teeny village, and in some pretty large woods. We had a few neighbors on our street, I think 7 total. Otherwise, it was a pretty empty long stretch of dirt road with large patches of wooded areas separating the properties, and a creek that ran for miles, and created deep slopes from the properties the houses were on to the creek itself. Anyway, that's just to paint a picture of how empty the woods are and some geography that will become relevant. I was at my neighbor's house. It was around 6 p.m. These neighbors had 3 kids that I often played with. Joe was my age, Taylor was a year or 2 younger, and Susie was the youngest. Their parents worked a night shift cleaning out an office building about an hour away from home, so they always brought Susie and Taylor, but thought that at around 10 years old, Joe was okay to be home alone. Joe and I were hanging out on their swing set just chatting when his parents loaded up the little ones and went on their way to the cleaning job. I remember this vividly from the way the sky looked to exactly what I was wearing in all its Y2K splendor. It feels like it happened only yesterday. About a half hour or so had passed. Joe and I were still chatting away and playing on the swing set, probably trying to go as high as possible without flipping it, but oh well if we did, when we heard a noise coming from the woods. More specifically, we heard a voice calling our names. It sounded distressed. We looked at each other to confirm that we were both hearing it when I spoke up. "That sounds like..." And then Joe cut me off. "Taylor?" Keep in mind, Taylor left about half an hour ago with his parents, who were well on their commute to the office that they clean. Plus, their driveway cuts in front of the swing set. We wouldn't have missed them if they came back for some reason. The voice continued to call out to us and then started following our names with one word: help. It wasn't a yell or a scream, it was a call-out. And looking back on it now, I think it sounded a little more sinister than our 10-year-old brains could comprehend. All we knew was that Taylor was in trouble, and we had to find him. We darted into the woods, following his voice, and the voice continued to grow louder and closer. We finally reached a spot where, by the volume of his voice, he logically should have been. We looked around, there was nothing. We looked above us, maybe he was playing a prank and was in a tree, but nothing. As soon as my gaze broke from looking in the trees, I looked directly across the creek at the other side of the steep hills the creek cut through, only to see and hear a very faint figure dart quickly through the trees. These hills that led down to the creek are so steep down and up We would spend summers using trees and small branches in our way down to get down safely. Sometimes we just gave up and let gravity do its thing. If this had been a prank, there was no way that Taylor could have made it over there that quickly, or even quietly. Needless to say, I went home before dark that night. My 3-year-old son suffered from chronic ear infections last year, which led to him having high fevers. I slept with him on this particular night because I needed to give him Tylenol throughout the night to keep his fever down and keep him comfortable. I set my alarm to wake me up at around 2:30 a.m. When I woke up, I went into the kitchen to get the Tylenol. I noticed a bright light shining into the apartment from our deck door, which also illuminated part of the woods behind my apartment. When I went over to see what it was, it turned out to be a car with those bright LED headlights in the parking lot to the far back right of the apartment. I figured they were dropping someone off. I saw the movement of what resembled a dog walking around near the woods. I started to think that the lady who usually walks her dog, a cute little corgi, in that area purposely faced her car in that direction so she could see while she walked her dog. As it got closer, I realized that there was nobody out there walking a dog, and there was no dog. I don't know what it was I saw, but I'll describe it in the best way that I can. At first, it looked just like a dog, corgi-sized, but as it walked closer, it looked like your average house cat. Then it looked like a black bear, and then it looked like a koala. I live in North New Jersey, farmland and lots of woods, and there are no wild koalas here. At this point, my heart is pounding out of my chest, and I'm scared. The fear I felt was like a primal type of fear that I have never felt before. I ran to my bedroom to wake up my boyfriend, and I shook him awake very roughly. I said, "You gotta come see this." He was a bit annoyed with me. When we look outside together, we see this thing getting closer, and it looks like a skunk now. White stripe down the center with the perky, fluffy tail. I said, "Oh, it's just a skunk," with a little chuckle. I felt a bit embarrassed that I woke him up over a damn skunk, but at that moment I also felt relieved. However, I was mistaken. As it walked, it looked as if it was struggling to find a form. I thought it looked like it was falling apart, but also coming back together again at the same time. I know this doesn't make sense, but it's hard to find the words for what we saw. After the skunk formation, it looked like a person crawling on the ground with some type of fur or skin attached to them around the legs. Then it changed again and looked like a raccoon, groundhog, black bear, cat, koala, deer, and skunk. The part that stuck out to me the most was that, whatever it was, it seemed to be coming apart or shedding, but at the same time, it was growing. Whoever had their headlights on turned them off as it went deeper into the woods. This happened pretty quickly. I'd say it was only a couple of minutes from start to finish. He ended up going back to bed, but I couldn't sleep after that, so I grabbed a flashlight and shined it into the woods to see if I could see it again. But it was gone. I also opened the door to see if I could hear anything, but I couldn't. It was very quiet. I had a hard time going back to sleep that night. My boyfriend wasn't scared, but he was confused and stunned. He didn't know what to make of it. I was scared and creeped out. I know if I hadn't woken him up to see it for himself, he most likely would not have believed me, and would have chalked it up to me being groggy from just waking up, or it just being an animal. Unfortunately, I know what I saw, and I'll never forget it. Hello everyone. I live in rural southwest Virginia, in Appalachia, and heard odd whistling in the woods a few days ago at night. It started when I was playing airsoft alone in the woods at about 7 p.m., in almost pitch black. I live a lonely existence, and was walking around the woods behind my house. I got to a clearing just on top of a hill and sat down to take a rest. Just when I sat down, I heard odd whistling. It was perfect whistling, and whistled a tune that I had never heard before. It was clear and it sounded close, within 150 feet or less, and came directly from behind me. It would have had to have been in the woods, and near the property line with one of our neighbors. It instantly gave me the chills down my back, and I got the feeling of being watched. I, not being an idiot and having a brain, wasted no time in sprinting full speed down towards my house, hopping over rocks and limbs. The whistling stopped shortly after I got moving, but I still felt like I was being watched, and like something was off. I didn't see anything, when I did turn back to look while opening a gate, that is, but that may be because of the darkness and the distance I had moved. I don't think it was a bird, as the leaves on the trees haven't regrown yet, and it still stays cold at night, and sometimes during the day. But I don't know much about birds. There were also no birds to be seen, and everything else was quiet. I also doubt that it was a person, as I heard no talking, no leaves crunching, no other noises. I should also mention the whistling started out of nowhere, and did not gradually get louder as if someone or something was moving closer while whistling. I should also mention that I've been in those woods a decent amount of my life, and have never heard anything like it before, not even once. I was a bit tired, but I've been more tired before while being up in those woods at similar times, and I'm not one to hallucinate. The situation still gives me the chills when I think about it. I've had the feeling of being watched before in those woods, but those feelings have never been so intense and extreme as that one night. I was hoping that someone could know what it was. Was it an animal? Maybe. But me and my family, have dogs around the house, and most wild animals stay away. And I haven't really seen anything outside of a bear or two and some deer in the woods. I should also mention the dogs occasionally bark randomly into the woods, but they weren't really barking at that moment when the whistling happened. I was hoping that someone could identify what it was. Maybe, if there's even enough information. And I'm not saying that it was paranormal, but I'm not saying that it was just a wild animal either. Also, apologies for typing so much. I just want to make sure that all the details are included. I should also mention that the neighbors aren't exactly close, and they would have no reason to be out in the woods at night. No known trail cams or anything like that. I, a young adult female, had been to many a Halloween party and nightclubs we'd hung out in over time. They would have the best costume prizes, and the music where we went was fantastic. I love to fast dance, so I would stick to beer and keep hydrated and happy, and then I'd easily be sober to go home. But I'd passed that phase, now in my late 20s. Some of my best friends had even moved away, making me feel empty. I now dated a guy who was a bit older, and had at that time met a brother of his and his wife. They were really nice. I started finding his wife, Lee, enjoyed some of the same hobbies as I did, and the conversation between us always really flowed. We made fast friends. She adored Halloween and had a great sense of humor. It was very talkative, fun, and creative. She asked if I'd come to her Halloween party that she and her husband were hosting, and they would have a bonfire on their land, and cook out and grill some steaks. It sounded fun. First, my date wouldn't come, because he was adamantly opposed to Halloween due to his convictions. I later wisely dumped him. I liked the hostess so much, though, and we'd often meet for lunch during my break from work, which was a whole hour long. At one of our lunches, Lee begged me to come whether the guy I was dating wanted to go or not, and I agreed. I decided upon being a fuchsia-colored butterfly with these giant sequined wings. I actually looked really good. I met many of their friends, all fun and open to talking to me, but they all already knew one another, and apparently went to some church together, which was fine. But honestly, they were all too old for me, and talked about things that I couldn't care less about. I was never so bored as they laughed at what seemed nothing much. Here I sat without even a simple highball or a glass of wine and ever heavier butterfly wings. Costumes are much more fun when you've had a few beers or something, I mused to myself. Hell, I didn't know this was going to be a tri-party, I was thinking. They were all teetotalers, I thought. I felt hungry and was sick of the Diet Coke that I was sipping, disappointed. The house was newly built and very artistically decorated. The basement we were in had big windows with curtains, and the floor was carpeted, and it was beautiful. She'd placed her mechanical witch on the hearth of the fireplace, and since she loved cats, as I do, had several cat figurines and pumpkins scattered about tastefully. Suddenly, everyone got the word. The bonfire was ready, and people stood all at once to ascend the steps and then go outside to the backyard. I began to stand up then and was really struggling with my wings. They were so bulky and long, and now everyone was ahead of me leaving. I got them off and then put them aside to go upstairs, when someone poked me kind of hard in my back. Turning, thinking I was the last person upstairs, I saw the mechanical witch. She then moved her machinery around a little, moving her head and then stopped. I knew she'd stopped working a couple of years ago, but it had been the end of her broomstick. I wasn't really near her, I thought, as a deep feeling of dread flooded over me. All I can say was that the air around me felt pressurized, and I caught up to the other people to join in putting hot dogs on coat hangers and marshmallows, and just being glad I was out of that damned basement. I ended up leaving my wings, and I didn't look back. Hi, Raven, and everyone. Just a true, quick story for you. My uncle, my mother's brother, was an electrician. He learned the trade in high school, passed a rigorous exam, and entered the military, where he used his expertise on airplanes to keep them airborne. When he got out of the service, he worked for a couple of companies, doing work as an electrician, and then opened his own security systems company. My mom and I always followed crimes, so when the family assembled often at Grandma's house, he would talk about commercial break-ins and residential terrors all the time, since my earliest memory. He realized I had an aptitude for helping him evaluate premises for security and how someone could attempt to break into the place. I would help him throw wire into attics and things growing up, even though I worked in the medical field when I got out of high school. I did eventually attempt to buy his business when he was quite old, but though he wanted it, it never worked out. But I went ahead and did open my own security systems at an opportune time, when the panels and contacts all went wireless routinely, about 2000. I had a customer and quickly placed all door and window contacts, a garage door opener that alerted the owner's phone so she could control it, and cameras. Some indoor features were new that year, motion sensors capable of snapping 3 photos of what set it off. I carefully placed them diagonally across an expanse of kitchen, and it covered the back door. Not long after she had it, she wanted me to check something that set it off a couple of times. Reviewing placements and reports, I checked the images. There was a see-through man's ghost right by her kitchen table. I showed her, creeped out. Then she said like she was annoyed with her kids. I told them not to play with that Ouija board, My sister and I are partners in our security business. We know what the sensor was doing, and it freaked us out. The first second is at the second of the motion, and there was no image. The second image shows the ethereal man. The third image, he was disappearing, kind of like a shadow. We've seen other creepy properties, but that's for another time. And definitely leave those portals alone. I was a female of 21, and our family friend was in his very late 70s. He decided that some rooms needed painting, and I agreed. I'd recently helped my sister rehab her old 1920s house. We did many things to it. So I told him I would definitely help him. His house was built in the late 1940s, and he'd been there since the middle 50s, maybe. His daughter had grown up there and married after college. His wife had died of a brain tumor in the early 1970s, and now it was about 1980. We'd picked out a light celery green, it was called. It was light and fresh-looking. The walls looked a dingy something, just dark and dirty now. I just love that first coat. We had one can of paint, and I was doing this after my nearby work in a dental office. I really made progress quickly, and he was really going as well. It was a really large living room. Before the hardware store closed, I told him that he should run up to that store and get another can of that paint. I had the screen wooden door latched, and inner front door open to get air that summer night. I saw his elongated 1960s car back out, and he waved and pulled off to the short distance to nab the paint before closing. As I watched him leave, and stood there assessing my work, I figured I would sit down on his couch, an old 1920s huge silver gray one with curls at each end. We had thrown a tarp on it to keep it clean. As soon as my butt hit the couch to wait for him, and as I could still see his wave, a finger poked my right ribcage. I jumped up quickly, hollering his name, though I had seen him pull away to the store, and it was so creepy. Other things also happened there. Nightly as he read, he would get major knocks on his ceiling. 3 of them. He figured that it was his wife saying get to bed. And maybe it was. Also, he had an old reddish-brown desk with a bookshelf behind full wooden doors that he had crammed with books and papers with drawers beneath. Many a time that damned desk would knock. Also, often as we would talk, we would hear something descend the steps to the attic, and then stand on the landing and shift its weight, creaking the wood. It never turned, and then went down the last 2. Like it was listening to us talk, or was waiting. And it happened all the time. This happened about 15 years ago. I was a teenager at the time. I had a dog who was Doberman mixed breed. We lived in the countryside on about 15 acres of land. My neighbors were known to shoot dogs if they entered their properties, so I rarely let my dog run freely unless he was carefully supervised. He had a red collar and red leash that I'd walk him with. I had just taken him on a walk, and once we were done, I put him in the house, and then went back outside to do a few chores. As I was in the backyard, I saw that my dog had somehow already gotten out of the house. I was confused as to how he had escaped, but I figured my mom had maybe accidentally let him out. He was running towards the neighbor's house, his red leash flapping around behind him. My heart jumped, and I began to chase after him through a field behind our house. All of a sudden, he stops and turns around. This was not my dog. This was not my dog at all. This dog was a Doberman, but as he turned around, he bared his teeth and had glowing red eyes. These eyes were piercing and evil, almost as if there was fire within them. My jaw dropped, and before I could even react, A portal opened up and the dog jumped inside the portal, and then it closed. I screamed out loud in horror and confusion as I started to run back home. I ran faster than I ever had. This was a type of fear that I had never felt before. I actually felt like I was running for my life. My heart was beating out of my chest, and I knew that I had to check on my dog. I ran into the house, locking the door behind me, and there was my Doberman, laying down in the living room with his red collar. He had never escaped. That was absolutely not him out in the field. If it wasn't him, then what the hell was that? I know the story sounds outrageous and unbelievable, but this happened. This Doberman was clear as day. So clear that I chased after him, truly believing that this was my dog. I've told the story to a couple of friends in the past, and they insisted that I saw a hellhound. If this is the case, I know that hellhounds are said to be very bad omens. They're known as messengers of death. My grandfather had recently passed around this time, and we had held a funeral for him and buried him on the property. I'm not sure if there is a connection, and I've never necessarily believed in them, though. I've always thought them to be merely creatures of folklore, but this story has always haunted me, and I think about it often. If anyone has had any similar experiences, I would love to know. And thank you. I found myself between jobs for the only time of my life. I absolutely always had a job all lined up and gave a written 2-week notice. But things on my job got weird, so I looked for something totally different. I had a dental and medical background as a dental assistant, and then phlebotomist. But I just wanted to work outside of healthcare after finishing college. I'd worked in business for 8 years at this point, so I've worked in many fields, including retail, for example, and staying in each profession for about 7 years. I have a solid work ethic and am no stranger to cold, hard reality. I've always been a worker and never took drugs. I'd felt it necessary to quit my business job. I lay thinking about how I needed to check the website of the university I had attended. Maybe by chance there may be a job online there. Any job. Then, if I could work, they would have options to take classes. I could get my master's degree, I thought. But alas, due to the swing shift, that was impossible. I located a job on the campus in security. I would need to go to a week's training at another college several hours away, pass a written exam and physical training. I'm a female and most of the other candidates were male, making for odd rivalry. So, I had taken an online detective training, and when I applied and got the job, I felt it was an interesting comment in my book that if one wanted to become a detective, one should work a security job of any type for 1 year. So I did. I was between jobs, so I seized that chance to do so. It challenged me physically, but I'd already had pretty advanced CPR, and could write a hell of a comprehensive security report as an English major in college. What I needed was experience. Well, I got lots of that. The job exposed me to the understandable types of challenges, but also I experienced paranormal and strange phenomena. So I may post a few creepy stories later in my year and a half in the campus security. One black night, it was chilly outside. The dorms at the bottom of the hill seemed quiet, which was unusual. But it was early in the week, I reasoned. I'd walked through all the dorms and the main building on campus and locked them on time. Things were going well. I was glad since I was working alone until relief came at 11 p.m. I ascended the hill further to the library, and I gazed up at it. It was very pretty with the clear skies and a million stars, I thought. I was caught up and all was well. Then, a swooshing, burning, or sizzling sound came right past my left near my head. Turning, I saw this grapefruit-sized ball of orangish yellow light. It sizzled and seemed to stand still just in front of me, and then zip way up as if to avoid features in the library's architecture. It was as if it wasn't just shot out of a possible flare gun from the direction of the dorms at the foothill, but moved with intelligence. At first I thought, fireball? Flare guns? But not when it could put on brakes near me and let me gaze on it, and then zip up super high over that more distant library. So, wow. I'd written my report line by line according to times as normal. Now my night was nearing being over. As I waited for the next shift for this one guy, I thought how a fellow worker had told me how he'd been behind an athletic building that backed onto the golf course and sat in the vehicle assigned to him and had gone to sleep. One night he saw something he adamantly refused to talk about. He never used that area again to nap. Then, I really began to ponder what he had seen. But again, he never dares say anything, and would just clam up. So, fiery orb, you are very cool. I wonder sometimes about the things that we know precious little about. I wanted to tell you about the dream that I had last week. Or maybe it was a hallucination, or paralysis. Whatever it was, it left me feeling uneasy when sleeping in my apartment. The night leading up was extremely typical. I had come home at 11:30 p.m. from my boring second shift job. I changed into my athletic clothes and waited for my boyfriend to get to my place so that we could head to the gym. We like going late at night when it's fairly empty, so we normally don't get back to my place until 2 a.m. We shower and do our normal night routine of having a snack, brushing our teeth, and quick skincare. It would have been anywhere between 2:30 to 3 a.m. by the time we finally lay down to go to sleep. He's the type who falls asleep instantly and sleeps on his back, causing him to snore so loud that I'm genuinely surprised I haven't received a noise complaint from any of my neighbors. I, on the other hand, have a mind that wanders and keeps me up longer than I'd like. However, I do eventually drift off to sleep, I'd guess around 4 a.m. It couldn't have been much longer after when I had woken up, because it was still eerily dark and quiet outside. My boyfriend is still passed out beside me, and abnormally quiet himself. He's no longer snoring, as I lay facing away from him. My eyes are indeed open, and I find myself staring at my closet door, which is cracked open, and the light is on. Weird. I would never leave the door open, as I have a naughty cat who would destroy the contents of my closet in a matter of minutes. I would also never leave the light on, as I'm one of the weirdos who can't fall asleep unless it's pitch black and completely silent. But for whatever reason, my closet door is open, and the light is on. However, I find myself unable to move in order to fix it. Then, suddenly, I get the feeling of impending doom, and I, in my awoken/dreaming state, can tell that beyond that door are 2 sets of stairs. One set leads up, and the other set leading down. Coming from the downside of the stairs, I can hear heavy footsteps ascending on the creaking steps. I know the person coming has ill intentions. I'm panicking, unable to move, thinking to myself that this person is coming to attack me. I'm the target. But whoever this is will likely attack my sleeping boyfriend first, since he's sleeping closest to the door. I feel remorse knowing my boyfriend will be hurt as a result of simply being there, while whoever this is wants to hurt me. Then, suddenly, the steps had reached the top of the stairs and stopped. I could see the light from the cracked door being cut through with the darkness of a body blocking it. My heart was racing, thinking this was it. We'd be attacked, tortured, and killed. I couldn't move, and my boyfriend was sleeping, blissfully unaware of what was taking place. There was nothing we could do to stop it. Then, just when I think our attacker is about to make his move, the lights turned off. I see the door close ever so slowly, and I feel relief rush over my body as I hear the click of the door latching. I listen as I hear the steps starting again, but going up this time, and slowly fading into nothingness. My body abruptly shoots up into a sitting position, once again, able to move. My eyes dart across the room as if searching for confirmation that what I just witnessed actually happened, when they land on the closed closet door with no light seeping through its cracks. I sighed in relief and disbelief. I look over to my still sleeping boyfriend, whose snores are now filling my apartment, too scared to get up and check my closet. I laid back down, scooting closer to him, and pulling the blankets over my head, forcing myself back to sleep. The next morning, I wake up to my boyfriend scrolling his phone next to me, and I regale him with my horrific nightmare, and even he is too scared for me to finish the story. I have him get up to check the closets, and to my comfort, the only thing behind the door is my pile of unfolded laundry. I still don't know what this was, why it happened, or why my brain was insisting that I was about to become a homicide victim, but I hope that I never experience anything like this again. I'm really new to these parts of Reddit and paranormal, so I'll try to describe my story as good as I can. One day, probably around 5 to 6 years ago, I was in the final years of elementary, and around 14 to 15-year-old me and a few of my friends went to this sort of lake a few kilometers away from our town/village. We rode on bikes. It usually took us around 25 minutes to get to the water, and to get there, you had to go through this road that was crossing a local ranch/farm. Me and my best friend went ahead of the group because we were faster, and we decided that we would wait for the rest at the crossroads of the ranch and the 2 roads leading into the woods. We stopped at the crossroads, looked around for a few minutes, and when we looked at the direction of the road leading deep into the woods, we saw something. I got shocked. My heart ached from the eeriness that I felt. I saw a creature that looked like a large black horse head with a sort of black cloak, and after a few seconds, the creature disappeared. After the years, I can't remember if it just vanished in the blink of an eye or ran away. But when we looked back at each other to make sure if the other one saw it as well, we both were scared as hell, and confirmed we both saw it. We decided to go further to look at the road where the creature was at, because the road was kind of on a hill, so we didn't see behind it too much, because it went right down after a few meters. It was gone. Nowhere to be seen. So it completely erased the possibility that it was just a horse from the ranch, even though we knew it looked nothing like a regular horse. When the others caught up, we didn't say anything because no one would believe us. Or maybe we did. I don't remember much after that. And then I almost forgot about this whole incident until a few months back, when I saw some TikToks with my girlfriend about skinwalkers and wendigos. When I remembered that day and the creature, I instantly started to freak out on the inside. Could that creature be something like that? I searched up that wendigos are Native American mythology, and they probably aren't in Europe, Central or Eastern. So, what was that then? Today I reunited with a few of my friends from elementary and with my old best friend, and I brought this up, to see if he still remembers. He said he does. A black horse-headed giant thing. I got the chills because I realized it really did happen back then, and I have a witness. So, I decided to finally address this thing, and this sub seemed like the place for it. If you have any ideas of what this could have been, I would appreciate any help. I was an English major at my university. I secured an internship with a magazine that was locally produced and was said to be the fastest growing magazine in the country. It was called Today's Woman. On one of my assignments, I went to a local old area that's quaint and cute, but also has plenty of every kind of modern convenience, but also a very rich history. I was supposed to write about the woman owner and her shop, which was located in a 2-story white brick house that was quite old. I would interview the owner and take some photographs of her in the old house. She told me that it was haunted and related that when she purchased the house, intending on offering large and small antique items that included furniture all the way to small items, it was beautifully decorated. Almost anyone could afford to buy something very cool in there, like an ornate notebook or pen, or an antique secretary desk with the bookshelves behind locking doors. I had a video camera as well as a standard 35mm camera at the time, since the digital camera's pixels and lux, light sensitivity, was rather poor at that time. I walked throughout and had interviewed the owner and had taken many photographs. She pointed out a nasty doll. Growing up, my mother had a plaster baby doll that I despised. That damn thing was possessed or something. My sister and I kept begging her to give it to Goodwill or to throw it out as kids. This doll could be her evil sister. The eyes rolled, batting the eyelashes with some little weight mechanisms in it. The paint was off its light pinkish white face, and she told me the story then. The place was sold to her, and they closed on the deal and she had the keys. She and her partner cleaned every door, window, and wall on both floors and the basement. They had its paint all refreshed everywhere. Nothing remained of whatever it had previously been. When she had stalked her cash register for that day, she saw that doll right at that spot. She would ask her partner about why they had that doll. In a few moments, she came in and asked her, and she said that she had never seen it before. She had only supervised new merchandise, like pens and Victorian-style notepaper and the antique furniture, vases and mirrors. No dolls. She looked it over, asking where she found it. Right here, in this little corner by the cash register, where it is right now. She pointed. No, she did not. She kept it there as it was strange. I would have burnt it, but I digress. Another thing is that a well-meaning neighboring business had called her to tell her they'd left on an upstairs light, and that it was clear some woman was in there and she had just met her and her partner, and they had just left her store to go home for the night, and saw the light come on. Off and on, this seemed to occur. So I ascended the staircase, and everything was glass and on glass shelving. I was taking a photo, being perfectly still. The owners were downstairs. All of a sudden, the weirdest vibration, sort of like high-pitched rumble, began. At first I thought it was just glassware singing as crystal will as a big truck went by, maybe. I was still, but the rumble increased threefold, and then kept at that pitch of constant vibration. I videotaped it then. When I went downstairs, I mentioned the vibrations, and they looked at one another and told me that it happens, and they wondered if it would do it for me, saying that it wasn't a truck going by in the streets or any other explanation. People in Middletown, Kentucky, have seen the woman at that window up there many times with lights. If you look it up, it's called the Head House, because a doctor named Head had that building as his family's home, and I bet you could find it online. Like the title suggests, which is paranormal experiences working at a funeral home and cemetery combo location, I work in death care at a combo location funeral home, meaning that we have a funeral home, cemetery, and crematory on site. I know people like to debunk stuff on this sub for good reasons, in a lot of circumstances. So I wanted to see the response to some of the stories from my coworkers and I. I'll start off with the typical light stuff. One of my coworkers tends to come in very early every morning to start at her work, while I like to stay late. We both spend a good amount of time alone in the funeral homes. We both have had experiences of hearing footsteps down the halls, wood floors and long hallways that echo, seeing things out of the corner of our eyes and hearing faint voices. Not too surprising, considering there are an abundance of loved ones in our care at any given time, some having more traumatic passings than others. I will admit, though, that the funeral home itself is pretty tame. There have been many strange occurrences in the cemetery experienced by the grounds crew, cemetery staff, and funeral home staff. One day I was attending a service early morning, and I turned and saw a man under a tree not too far away from me. He looked out of place, and I saw no cars around besides the few the family drove. I turned to look at him once more, and then for a third time, a minute or so later, and he had vanished. This has happened to multiple people. Mind you, we have 17 gardens. I would have seen him walking away or would have seen the car he was in. A coworker of mine, on the cemetery side, worked with the man for a while after his wife passed. He wanted a granite pedestal, a stand that holds an urn with customizable toppers, with a bird bath on top. For about a year, he would hound my coworker wanting to know when it would arrive. When that is, unfortunately, the expected waiting period for custom granite memorials. When it finally arrived, we placed his wife inside and had a service. A few months after, my coworker who worked with him woke up from her sleep because she kept hearing bird bath, bird bath, bird bath being yelled in her ear. She actually came in the next morning and said that he died before we had even received the first call, the notification of death. Lastly, to avoid this being too long, is 2 stories about our chapel mausoleum. It is the only mausoleum on site with an interior, and has large stained glass windows and rows of chairs to sit and visit loved ones, or for when services are held inside. The mausoleum is locked every day at 4, when the grounds team leaves, and is unlocked around 6 or 7 a.m. One morning, one of the guys walked into the mausoleum after unlocking it to turn on the lights, and he saw a woman sitting in one of the chairs by the windows facing away from him. He freaked out and walked out to call the superintendent. When he walked back inside, the lady was gone. There was only one entrance to that mausoleum that he was standing right in front of. We hear knocking and shifting noises all the time in the mausoleum. It's so prevalent. I actually address everyone in there and when I enter and exit to avoid any bad juju. We had a maintenance crew working on the mausoleum for a while that would come in every morning to find their tools moved around the room. They would set them on one side of the chapel and come back to them on the other side of the room. One of the workers said that he would never come back. Well, this post isn't very short. It's the shortest I could make. The cemetery is spookier than the funeral home, but I would love to hear what you all think of these stories. I've been listening to your stories for a couple of months now, and I'm really enjoying the experience. So much so that I feel comfortable finally talking about this. I've never talked about what I saw late one night. I think mostly because I didn't want to sound crazy. Well, here it goes. I was up late one night. It was about 1:30 a.m. I don't usually stay up that late, but the next day was my day off, and I didn't have anywhere to be, and I'd gotten sucked into watching TV. I was just sitting on the couch, not laying down or slouched over. I only had water and soda to drink. I was not under the influence of any drugs. I wasn't tired yet, and I was still really into watching TV. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something in the corner of the ceiling. When I turned my head and looked up, I saw a dark gray cloud start to manifest in the corner of the ceiling. I couldn't help but just stare. I was confused and curious, but not afraid. It took about 30 seconds or so to get as big as it was going to get. It was about 2 feet across, if I had to guess. It started out as a small, dark gray cloud about 6 inches across or so. The whole time I watched it grow in size, it was opaque and stayed in the same color. Then it took off from the corner straight for me. I ducked while letting out a yelp. It darted very fast and it took me by surprise, and that is when I felt the first sense of fear. I did not look behind me. I was too afraid of what I might see. I don't know where it went. I do not know if it went into another corner or if it was still in the house. I just shut the TV off and got up off the couch and went straight to bed. My husband was already in bed asleep, so a quick cuddle and I felt safe enough to fall asleep. Until now, I haven't told my husband or anyone else. We no longer live there, not because of that, it's just that location was never meant to be permanent. It never happened again in either the old or the new place. I still, to this day, think about it and wonder just exactly what I saw that night. I was going to the church that I attended, St. Bartholomew's in Buccal, Kentucky. They advertised a Bible study, so my sister and I signed up and attended. It was the first night of it, and it would be weekly. A reading was read by one group member first, and we had a study guide of questions to create conversation as we dissected the meaning of the passage from Revelations. Each person in our small group said something, and then it was my turn. I began speaking to this group of strangers, and everyone gave me this rapt attention. I thought, wow, they must think what I'm saying is profound or something. It sort of encouraged me, so I continued to lend my critical library analysis. When I finished, the group stared at me and then said, "While you were talking, one book came away from all the others. Then, as you continued, another book moved as if a hand was slowly moving those books one at a time. And when you stopped, it stopped." I didn't see it at all since it was behind me on a shelf. I didn't return though, because the priest who was there that night, an avid tennis player in his 80s, had been to the university I was working in security for that next day to play and collapsed dead on the court, just before I arrived at work. My coworker told me, not knowing if I even knew him. I don't think there was any connection, but anyway. In 2010 or so, a buddy and I headed out trout spearing, or tribal, on a small creek that flows into Lake Superior. A few key points. It has a few slight turns, but it's fairly straight and rocky, as the land drops pretty good down to the lake. This is 2 to 3 a.m. on a cold, wet spring night. This is heavily wooded and thinly populated BFE. Ain't no one around here. Nearest house is maybe 1.5 miles away. 2 things happened that night that, to this day, we cannot explain. We were working our way downstream using headlamps to spot trout. We noticed a red light in the distance that didn't belong there. Like if you were seeing the aviation light on top of a radio tower. We fish on and we notice that the light is still with us. I remember thinking, it's a cigarette, and someone's being an ass and is creeping on us. I bust up the bank, and the light now appears miles away. This happened a few more times. It looks as if it's right there, then as you move to it, it appears farther away. Again, this is out in the sticks. There are no towers or anything topped with a light. No houses, no close roads. We were a little curious and stumped, but we fished on. And then it goes south. The second event, we're on the east bank heading north, being downriver. We're hoofing it because we have our limit, and that red light is creepy. We climb up the bank to get around a windfall and the remnant of a huge long-gone beaver dam. I'd say we were up on the bank and moving downriver for maybe 60 yards. We scramble back down to the water's edge, and the freaking river is flowing the other way. This is a fairly straight river. No oxbows. We've fished it. We know it. The world is freaking upside down. We're not turned around on a bend. Add this to the red light, and we sort of looked at each other, and my buddy nodded his head to the west, which ought to be straight across the river, because to the right, or north, is Lake Superior, which is downriver, and left is south to the beaver ponds. But the river has flipped, so west? Anyway, my buddy nods west and says, "Let's go." We beelined it to the nearest road, which was right where it was supposed to be. Dead west. And we hoofed it back to the truck. I spent a lot of time on what passed for Google Earth back then, trying to figure out what light we saw and how we got upside down on the river. It's just not possible. The river cannot shesh uphill that far inland, and up that gradient. It's just baffling. And I think about it all the time. When a loved one dies, it's deeply disturbing. When your mother dies, it's a whole different experience. First, I'll tell you the story of my longtime friend Connie. When Connie was a sophomore in high school, she lost her mother. Of course, it was sad and traumatic, and a tender time you really need her. Family and close friends crowded the small home as they supported one another and each brought a dish, so no one had to do a lot of cooking after the wake. Connie excused herself from the others to grab the phone in the kitchen. "Hello?" "Connie," and then static, and then once again, "Connie?" and more static. "Mother?" she said incredulously. "Mother?" she demanded, but there was more bad static. Then the call disconnected. By now, 3 family members were by her side thinking she was just having a meltdown or something, but had to admit that the phone had definitely rang. Now Connie is 75 and still insists that that call was her mother, and that their phone never had static, even one other time except that day. When my mother died, it was quite sudden, which is like a fatal earthquake to your life. Her bedroom was across the hallway from my own, and after she died, I closed the door to it and everything was perfect inside. The light was out, and I went into my bedroom to bed. It was a physically exhausting day as well as being emotionally exhausting. The routines imposed on my life of full-time work and responsibilities were mangled, rerouted. I lay down and drifted asleep, a welcome escape from the new emerging realities. Suddenly, I was awoken by a short, definite command. "Carla." I never awoke in the night, but though I did not believe I was dreaming, I tested it with my eyes open. Otherwise, I was too scared to move. "Carla," she repeated. I raced to her door and threw it open now. I flipped on the light switch, but just the empty room met me. And later months down the road, I was in my bedroom and still had the L-shaped hallway that connected all 3 bedrooms. And the bathroom had a main light and a light switch that clicked, definitely when you put it on or off. A loud, distinctive slap sound because you had to hit it with your hand. It was not a newer Mercury switch that is silent and velvety smooth, turning it off and on. Mother always would tell everyone, "Turn off this hallway light." And so now I had that on as well as my overhead bedroom light. Suddenly, I heard that light switch slap off, which is impossible. And I can't forget that.